Chapter 515. On the northern plains. The Shuangjin dynasty's supply wagons had already set out for quite some distance. Even from the highest watchtower in Donglin City, one could only see a small shadow of the convoy. It wouldn't be long before the convoy completely disappeared from their sight and stepped into the undercurrent of the conflict between the three factions. "How should I address you, General?" Kyujhua urged his warhorse to catch up with Zhong Xiuzhu, who was at the front of the group, and asked with a chuckle. Kyujhua preferred the 13th prince over the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen, but he knew very well that no matter which answer he chose, it was the same as choosing death. The only difference was that one would be executed immediately, while the other would be a delayed death. The only way he could find to survive was to find a way to stay on the northern frontier after this matter was over. If things didn't work out, then he would choose the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen and hide in the northern territories for a period of time. He would return to the plains after the Bloodsill tribe had declined. Even if he lost everything he had now, it was still better than losing his life. At this moment, Qiu Ting finally understood why the third prince had given him such a lucrative task, and why the people of the large tribes had mocked him. He hadn't thought much of it when he had received the generous gifts, but now it seemed that these fellows had clearly regarded him as a dead man. If he wanted to survive, he had to curry favor with the northern frontier by hook or by crook in exchange for a period of protection from the northern frontier or a permanent residence on the northern frontier. Because of her nervousness, she urgently needed someone to talk to. Secondly, Kyujhua's abilities lay in his cultivation and horseback. If he wanted to make a living after joining the northern frontier, he would have to walk the path of the army. Although Zhong Xiuzhu wasn't conspicuous yet, someone who could gain the favor of Li Zhongxing would definitely have great achievements in the future. That was why he chattered so much in order to make himself known. It could be said that he had put a lot of thought into it. Zhong Xiuzhu glanced at Kyujhua and rolled his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have a good impression of the Shuangjin barbarian to begin with. It was already good enough that he didn't draw his sword. Furthermore, Li Zhongxing had set him up as a reclusive person who didn't know how to speak the common language of the Qianwu continent. Under such circumstances, unless he had no other choice, he naturally wouldn't speak. Although these Shuangjin barbarian were already food in his mouth, he wouldn't disregard the big picture for a little personal grudge before he was completely confident. Moreover, it was obvious that Li Zhongxing had reminded him of an opportunity that could bring even greater losses to the barbarians. Why wouldn't Zhong Xiuzhu do it? However, these Shuangjin barbarian couldn't all die in the ambush. At least 2 or 3 Frost Mirror barbarian had to be released before they could return to pass on the news that Li Zhongxing wanted the Shuangjin dynasty to know. The supply convoy had been ambushed by Shenlin Jun's reserve forces, and the convoy was almost completely wiped out. When the time came, Li Zhongxing would take the opportunity to remove the checkpoint and find a way to lead these Shuangjin barbarian to meet the real Shenlin Jun's reserve forces. Including the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian, whose fate was already sealed, Zhong Xiuzhu had to use his great willpower to suppress himself so that he wouldn't laugh out loud. This time, the 49 knights following Zhong Xiuzhu weren't professional soldiers from the northern frontier. Some of them were hired wanderers, and some were cultivators that the Shifter Emperors Association had recruited from the Mercenary Union and the Demon Subduing Masters Association. However, most of them were trained by Luo Shu of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. In terms of cultivation, these 49 knights were not inferior to the carefully selected Frost Mirror cavalry generals. Moreover, their past experiences had given them a few more abilities than the Frost Mirror cavalry generals, who rarely moved around in the mountains. In terms of stealth, concealment, and tracking, even if the Frost Mirror cavalry generals had 10 times the number of them, they still wouldn't be able to compete with them in a battlefield that they were familiar with. Therefore, once the situation became chaotic, even if they ran into Shenlin Jun's reserve forces, about 80% of them could survive. If they were lucky, they might even be able to escape from the ambush site with a few survivors. However, Zhong Xiuzhu still needed time to come up with a general plan of action. Although some of the Frost Mirror cavalry generals had to return alive, who would live and who would die was still a matter of consideration. For example, Juechen, who was the messenger, would definitely take up one of the spots. The guy who was wearing an ordinary general's armor but was surrounded by several Frost Mirror cavalry generals probably had a powerful background as well. As for the rest of the spots, Zhong Xiuzhu would have to consider carefully. After all, although the idea of an ambush was proposed by the northern frontier, the scapegoat would definitely be the Shen Linjun's reserve forces. Therefore, the more people from the Shuangjin dynasty survived, the more credible the rumor that Li Zhongxing spread would be. But similarly, if all the important people survived, and the ones who died were just cavalry generals, the Shuangjin dynasty would naturally become suspicious. They might even take this opportunity to launch a war directly to see the truth of the northern frontier. Therefore, Zhong Xiuzhu needed time and space to observe the situation and determine the status of the Frost Mirror cavalry generals so that he could decide who would survive. According to the plan, the ambushers should be Zhong Xiuzhu's own people who had seized equipment from Wei River City. However, for the sake of realism, once the two sides engaged in close combat, even their own people would not hold back. If they were unlucky or not strong enough, they would die in vain. War had always been this cruel. Moreover, no one knew when the ambush would begin. Therefore, Zhong Xiuzhu's team leader had to arrange everything properly before the ambush happened. For example, he had to arrange at least 3 or 4 people around the valuable Frost Mirror barbarian. Once the battle started and the situation was not good, they would immediately cover the enemy's retreat. After all, they were all on the same side. Once the battlefield was divided, the brothers would not die even if they were captured. In order to ensure the implementation of the plan, Zhong Xiuzhu had even prepared a plan to completely wipe out. Fortunately, the people he brought with him were all elites. They did not have any combat strength or reaction time problems. As long as Zhong Xiuzhu gave the order, or if things deviated from his expectations, they would be able to react immediately. For a scholarly general like Zhong Xiuzhu, he only needed to be a wise man. Naturally, they would carry out the plan in a way that maximized their benefit. It was just that with Qiuzhua constantly chattering in his ear, not to mention that Zhong Xiuzhu's heart-nurturing kung fu had not yet reached the great accomplishment stage, even if he could reach the stage of being indifferent, it would still be difficult for him to ignore Qiuzhua, who was like a fly. Helplessly, he could only give an officer next to him a look. Chapter 5:16. The latter immediately understood and welcomed him with a smile. "Young clan leader, please don't make things difficult for our team leader. He's still familiar with this area and we still need him to lead the way. If he gets distracted and takes the wrong path into the deep mountains and forests, we'll all become food for the demonic beast. Besides, our leader doesn't speak the common language. We're the only ones who can communicate with him. If you have anything to say, why don't you tell me? I'll pass it on to both sides later." The officer quickly pulled Qiu Ting away from Zhong Xiuzhu with a warm smile on his face. Never in his wildest dreams would Qiu Ting have imagined that this smiling fellow was actually one of the famous torturers of the Imperial Secret Service. Who knew how many skins he had personally peeled off, not to mention how proficient he was in other cruel methods of torture. But just this smile alone made Qiu Ting, whose heart was in turmoil, feel a deep sense of security. At this moment, the two of them were undoubtedly chatting happily, as if they were close friends who were talking and laughing as they walked further and further away. Zhong Xiuzhu looked at the backs of the two people as they disappeared into the distance. Then, he faintly sighed and said in his heart, "Why don't I just kill them? It's so annoying to always have a fly by my side." The group advanced for another 4 hours. They were less than half an hour away from the Frost Mirror cavalry's encampment. However, Zhong Xiuzhu, who was at the front of the group, suddenly raised his right hand. In that instant, whether it was the cavalry or the supply troops, they all stopped in their tracks and carefully drew their weapons. The Frost Mirror cavalry, who was already suspicious of these northern frontier people, was shocked. They also drew their weapons. But the targets of the two sides were completely different. The northern frontier people were guarding the dense forest in front of them, while the Frost Mirror cavalry were guarding against these people from the northern frontier. After a few breaths, the Frost Mirror cavalry realized that the people from the northern frontier people weren't targeting them. But even though they were embarrassed, they didn't put down their weapons. They were still on high alert, as if they were worried that the people from the northern frontier people were putting on a show. They were waiting for them to lower their guard before attacking. "General, may I ask what's going on?" Qiu Ting whispered to a few of his trusted generals. Then, he rode to the front of the formation to ask about the situation. "There are no beasts in the forest. Even a startled bird wouldn't fall. What do you think is going on?" Zhong Xiuzhu glanced at Qiu Teng and said something in code, which the genial officer passed on to Qiu Teng. According to the original plan, there would be an ambush on the way. But the location of the ambush surprised Zhong Xiuzhu. This place was only a few minutes away from the Shuangjin dynasty's military camp. As long as they passed through this dense forest, they would enter the open plains. Then, they would arrive at the place where the Frost Mirror cavalry was gathered. If the commander of the Divine Forest Guard wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't have set up an ambush in such a place. After all, if the commotion caused by the battle had attracted the attention of the Frost Mirror cavalry, these starving fellows would quickly realize that there were no armed forces from the northern region in this dense forest that blocked their path of retreat. It was just a little more troublesome to travel. After passing through this forest, they would be able to reach Eastwood City, and then return to the Frost Mirror Plains through the main road there. Letting the Frost Mirror cavalry see a way out was a small matter. After all, most of the troops in the Northern Territory had gathered here, and the encampment wasn't too far away. If the Frost Mirror cavalry gave up on their mobility and entered the forest, they would lose at least 40% of their men before they could make it to the other end of the forest. Furthermore, there was a group of troops from the Southern Army blocking their path. When the pursuers met up with the Southern expedition, they would be able to surround the Frost Mirror cavalry and take them down. The only thing they had to be careful about was that if the two groups of Frost Mirror cavalry encountered each other, they could use their mobility advantage to surround the Frost Mirror cavalry. It was hard to say whether the Frost Mirror cavalry would be surrounded by the northern frontier or the southern expedition. Therefore, the ambush in front of them either had the confidence to take them down in an instant, or it was really an ambush. Moreover, it was an ambush that didn't know the current situation. Of course, the ambush wasn't the obedient rebel army of the aristocratic families punished by Li Zhongxing in the north. It was the real Shen Linjun's reserve force. Although these guys ran out of Wei River City, they didn't take any supplies with them except for their armor and weapons. If it wasn't for the food stored in the underground tunnel, many of the hundreds of thousands of people would have starved to death. In any case, this show was most likely real. The camouflaged troops had either been eliminated, or were waiting for their prey in a further place, or they had been set up by Li Zhongxing on their way back. It was just that this ambush was a little too amateurish. Not only did they clear the entire forest of wild beasts, they didn't even chase away the birds above them. Anyone who didn't know anything about the art of war or didn't pay attention to the details would definitely choose to go around this forest and choose another path. Were these guys really the elite Shen Linjun's reserve force? Zhong Xiuzhu reached out and patted his forehead. His face was gloomy as he raised his right hand and gently pressed it forward twice. According to the organization of the northern region, a heavy wagon was equipped with 4 civilian laborers and 2 auxiliary soldiers whose fighting strength was not as good as the frontline troops. However, Li Zhongxing had long replaced the civilian laborers and the auxiliary soldiers with the good soldiers of the Southern Expedition Army who did not look like much. Now they had 85 generals with good fighting strength and 1,200 elite soldiers at their disposal. It sounded good, but if they really encountered the hundreds of thousands of Shen Linjun's reserve force, it would be no different from delivering food to them. In fact, without the protection of seniors like the Fallen Star Army, Zhong Xiuzhu felt that even if they encountered a group of defeated soldiers, even if the difference in numbers between the two sides wasn't that big, their chances of winning were really low. After all, the ordinary soldiers of Shen Linjun's reserve force were basically equal to most of the Frost warriors on the battlefield. The Northern Frontiers reserve force might have more elite soldiers, but the difference wasn't that big. As for the combat strength of those elite soldiers, in a battle of this level, it was almost negligible. Fortunately, not many people noticed that something was wrong. Following Zhong Xiuzhu's order, a group of 10 elite soldiers instantly broke away from the formation and entered the dense forest in front of them with swords and shields in their hands. Soon, they were blocked by the dense weeds and tree trunks. Zhong Xiuzhu turned his horse slightly, closed his eyes slightly, and began to count silently, 1, 2, 3. Chapter 5:17. 15 Breath. Zhong Xiuzhu's eyes suddenly widened. He raised his right hand and made a fist. The elite soldiers who received the order immediately overturned the supply wagons beside them. They used these not-so-sturdy wooden wagons to build a temporary and simple fortification. Then, they raised their swords and shields and hid behind the supply wagons. Zhong Xiuzhu and his brothers also dismounted and retreated to the back of the fortifications. Clearly, the Mount Frost generals weren't too happy about this. After all, they spent most of their time on horseback. If they dismounted and fought these northern frontier soldiers on foot, they wouldn't even be able to last one round. They wouldn't even have the chance to escape. On the other hand, Qiu Teng, who had been whispering into Zhong Xiuzhu's ear, jumped down from her horse and hid behind the fortifications. Many Mount Frost generals rolled their eyes at her. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Before the Judgment Frost cavalry could reprimand them, the sharp sound of something tearing through the air rang out. Before the 34 Frost Mirror Riders could react, 11 of them were shot down by the volley of arrows. The rest of them also had a few arrows stuck in their bodies. Although the arrows weren't fatal for a short period of time, they still affected their mobility. This volley of arrows had basically crippled half of the Frost Mirror Riders' combat strength. As for Zhong Xiuzhu and his party, who had long anticipated this, they were practically unscathed. Most of the arrows were nailed to the supply wagons, while a small number of arrows were blocked by the shields. Of course, there were a few unlucky fellows who were still hit by the arrows. Those who were slightly luckier were shot in the arms and calves, which affected their combat strength but wasn't fatal. Those who were unlucky had their heads cleanly shot by an arrow. This time, Zhong Xiuzhu and the others didn't need to waste any more words. The remaining Frost Mirror cavalry immediately dismounted from their horses, which they viewed as their lover, and scrambled into the fortifications of the supply wagons. They began to wail like ghosts and howl like wolves. The Mirror Frost dynasty only had two battle styles. The first was to use cavalry and archers to harass the enemy while slowly trailing behind them. The second was to directly charge forward with the army. They didn't care about losses and only wanted to engage in close combat with the enemy. Of course, aside from the boorish ones, the Mirror Frost generals who could make the latter battle strategy were basically all confident that they would win. Who are these guys? Qiu Teng was trembling all over. His teeth chattered as he spoke. It was so loud that one would worry that he would bite his tongue. Zhong Xiuzhu's lips curled up. A bitter smile appeared on his face. He ordered in code, "Repair the fortification. Move the extra supply wagons to the front. We will wait for 1 or 2 more rounds of attack to see how strong the enemy is." To put it bluntly, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Everyone knew that during the time of the Wanjian dynasty, Lei Qiusheng, Yang Xingqi, and their personal guards were all elites in the world and were equally matched. In Lei Qiusheng's dynasty, after a few decades of development, the Divine Forest Army had become the #1 army in the Shunwu dynasty with the title of the world's #1 step, becoming a legend among legends. However, everyone in the northern frontier felt that Lei Qiusheng's era was about to end. A new era that belonged to Lin Yuan was about to begin. Shun Lin Jun, the world's #1 heavy infantry, should have retired from the stage. Who would become the first army in the northern frontier? This was the long-cherished wish of almost every soldier in the northern frontier. They had the northern frontier to defend, the southern frontier to attack, and the experienced and ruthless Starfall. There were also the graduates of the Star General class that Lin Yuan personally led. It was said that they had formed a secret special unit that had yet to be officially revealed. The scale of the southern expedition was too large. Sooner or later, different units would be assigned to different territories. Zhong Xiuzhu wanted to work hard with Donglin City as his goal. Although his real opponent was the Shuangjian dynasty, this didn't stop Zhong Xiuzhu from having the idea of personally training his own troops as the Northern Frontier's #1 army. Most of the people in front of him now were Shun Lin Jun's reserves. If he didn't even have the guts to challenge the reserves, How could Zhong Xiuzhu still have the face to compete for the title of the Northern Frontier's #1 army? Even if his troops did become the strongest army in the Northern Frontier in the future, his concession to Shen Linjun's reserves today would fiercely nail him to the pillar of shame. Even if he obtained that title, he wouldn't dare to openly show it. Although most of the people present were not Zhong Xiuzhu's subordinates, they were at the top of the Southern Expedition's food chain. Naturally, they wouldn't have the idea of directly retreating after hearing the other party's name. Now that Zhong Xiuzhu wanted to stay and fight with the other party, for them, it was something they couldn't ask for more. The other party shouldn't have a lot of people. They are just a defeated army. Zhong Xiuzhu slightly raised his eyebrows and sneered, although the ambush technique is lame, if it weren't for our quick reaction, they could have leisurely come up and killed us one by one. This level of attack isn't something that can be done by just anyone, so their identity is correct. The only thing that is wrong is the number of people. You mean, Officer Geng quickly took over the conversation, squinted his eyes and said, the other party deliberately covered up their marching tracks and scattered in the territory of the Northern Frontier. They just want us to focus on their original marching route. But in fact, the people who are still marching along their original marching route are almost all abandoned pawns. Zhong Xiuzhu nodded slightly and continued, also, if they have enough people, they should have come up to fight us at close range after seeing that we have finished building the fortifications and exposed their existence with the rain of arrows. But they haven't done anything yet. I think they are either the allies of the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry, or they don't have enough people and don't have the confidence to fight us at close range. The rain of arrows just now came suddenly and uniformly. Zhong Xiuzhu only heard the loud sound of bowstrings being released. Obviously, these people had drawn their bows, pulled their strings, and released their bows at almost the same time, so the countless sounds converged into one loud sound. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. But Zhong Xiuzhu's command was good, and his subordinates reacted quickly. Even building the fortifications with local materials was only a matter of seconds. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. So even if the other party was Shen Linjun's reserve force, they had no choice but to take Zhong Xiuzhu's army seriously. Chapter 518. Both sides have about the same number of people. We still don't know who will kill who. Geng Shu was obviously not someone who was afraid of trouble. He immediately sneered, how about we organize a counterattack? If they don't want to come out of the forest, we will rush in and play with them. Geng Shu was a member of the Genie Guards. He was Yu Dingchen, the one who received the order from Li Zhong. After delivering Li Zhong's handwritten document to Li Zhongxing, Yu Dingchen didn't immediately return to the safe Shunning city. Instead, he chose to stay at the front line to help the southern expedition. Although the ones sent to occupy the source of Wei River were a few subdivisions of the southern expedition, it didn't mean that the main force didn't lack manpower. Based on the current tragic degree of one army against a country, Li Zhongxing's troops had to be at least 3 times more than before to have the capital to be strong. Zhong Xiuzhu gently shook his head and sighed, no matter what, the other side is the world's elite Shen Linjun. Even if they are in the reserve force, they are not much weaker than us. If we rush in and fight with them, it won't be called a war. Speaking of this, Zhong Xiuzhuan paused and smiled bitterly, it's called delivering food. Yu Dingchen, who was originally calmed down by Zhong Xiuzhu, suddenly changed his expression. Even the hot blood in his chest cooled down a lot. Whether he admitted it or not, Zhong Xiuzhu's judgment was correct. After all, since ancient times, soldiers fought soldiers, generals fought generals. No one would give up the identity of a purple-level general to kill a small group of soldiers. In this case, the elite soldiers of the northern frontier were obviously not inferior to anyone. But only Shen Linjun was outside of common sense. This army that was firmly controlled by Lei Qiusheng recruited new soldiers every year. They were not selecting soldiers at all. Instead, they were selecting people who had the qualifications to become generals and bringing them back to Wei River City for training. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that Shen Linjun's reserve force was all generals. Not to mention their army, looking at the entire northern frontier, except for the 5,000 Star Fallen army, there was probably only the secret army formed by the star class that could win against Shun Linjun's reserve force. After all, Shun Linjun was selecting generals, but the star class selection of recruits was almost like selecting monsters. Zhong Xiuzhu, a scholarly general, could be regarded as a confidant and successor by Li Zhongxing after meeting Li Zhongxing face to face. Naturally, he had the ability. And he was only qualified to be invited to the star class for an interview. If he rejected it, then so be it. It was as if Lin Yuan had never cared about him. Although Li Zhongxing had the title of Southern Expedition General, in fact, he had only been brought out of Shun Linjun's reserve force for a little more than a year. However, this did not mean that Li Zhongxing was a newcomer to the battlefield. On the contrary, with Luo Shu's teaching and the process of fighting against various aristocratic families in the north, Li Zhongxing's growth speed could be said to be leaps and bounds. He quickly implemented the knowledge that he had learned in Wei River City. The current Li Zhongxing could not be said to be a famous general who could move unhindered in the world, but his level was not inferior to veteran generals who had fought hundreds of battles on the battlefield. Just based on this point, one could tell what kind of monsters were in the star class, not to mention those talented generals that Lin Yuan had focused on recruiting. Any one of them, after training for a period of time and turning their theoretical knowledge into experience, could be an existence that could lead a large army by themselves. We can't beat them, but that doesn't mean that I can't deal with them. My soldiers. Zhong Xiuzhu leaned against the fortifications and roared in a low voice. The elite soldiers around instantly cast their gazes over. Zhong Xiuzhu smiled and nodded, saying, "What you faced just now was not the aristocratic family's rebel army, not the roaming bandits of the forest, but the divine martial heavy steps, Shun Linjun." Speaking up to this point, Zhong Xiuzhu paused, and said with a bit of ridicule, "Of course, it's the reserve force. As the saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow." Shun Linjun's name was well known throughout the world. Even the people of the northern frontier had heard of this invincible army that gathered the leaders of the Shunwu dynasty. If they were told that the ambush was Shun Linjun, even if these elite soldiers had a strong sense of bravery in their hearts, they would not do something that would send them to their deaths. However, Zhong Xiuzhu pointed out that the other party was a reserve force, and even used a ridiculing tone to speak, which immediately drove away the nervousness in the hearts of many people. After the surrounding atmosphere calmed down a little, Zhong Xiuzhu continued, "Of course, Shun Linjun has been an army for decades, and the requirements for recruiting soldiers are basically the king of soldiers or the talented orphans of the battlefield. However, my southern expedition has been an official army for less than half a year. Asking you to go and risk your lives is a bit too much." The corner of Yu Dingchen's mouth twitched crazily. Listening to the continuous roaring laughter, he felt that his whole body was not good. Is there anyone who can boost morale like this? Just come up and tell your own soldiers that you can't beat them at all. Then why are you still here? Isn't it better to escape early? But it's not that we don't have a chance of winning. Zhong Xiuzhu's tone suddenly changed, and with a touch of the aura of a powerful army, he said in a deep voice, "We can't beat them, but you did a good job before. At this moment, Shun Linjun probably thinks that our group is one of the best in the northern frontier, and that we might be on par with them. Therefore, after they took advantage of us with the rain of arrows, they don't dare to come out and fight with us. Team leader, what do you mean by win?" A burly man slowly stood up and asked doubtfully, "We can't beat them in a fight. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that they are suspicious of us to retreat and stay here to wait for them to react?" Obviously, this man was a typical person who was frightened by Shun Linjun's name. As soon as he heard that they were no match for Shun Linjun, he immediately wanted to retreat. If it weren't for the fact that military orders were absolute, this man would have already started to run away. Therefore, when Zhong Xiuzhu tried to boost morale, he took the initiative to stand up and try to persuade Zhong Xiuzhu to withdraw the troops. Use your stupid brain and think about it. Shun Linjun is hiding in the dense forest. They can see us, but we can't see them. Why didn't they take advantage of the long-range attack after they took advantage of us? Instead, why did they stay silent? Yu Dingchen angrily pointed at the burly man and sneered, "With this little ability, you still have the face to say that you are a graduate of the Northern Frontier Academy. I advise you to go back to the furnace as soon as possible. Don't disgrace the northern frontier soldiers. Chapter 519. Zhong Xiuzhu slowly raised his right hand and pressed down Yu Dingchen's hand. He smiled and said, "Brother, that's a good question. If I want to win this war, I have to tell you what our chance of victory is. I also have to tell you why I'm so sure that we can win when I'm sure you're no match for them in a hand-to-hand combat." This time, even the burly man and Yu Dingchen looked at him with curiosity written all over their faces. First of all, although they are indeed elites who are stronger than us, they are still defeated soldiers in essence. If you've been praised as number one in the world for so many years and then suddenly got pulled down from your pedestal, your first reaction would be to fight with your life on the line. But if you can't beat them, you would feel sorry for yourself and feel that you don't deserve the title of number one in the world. If you meet someone who's not weak, you might not be able to win. Right now, the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces were in such a state of mind. Simply put, their confidence had already been shattered. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have this round of arrow rain. In the past, how could the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces put us, who had seen our banners, in their eyes? Second of all, although they seemed to have the upper hand, we didn't lose much of our main force. On the contrary, not long after they were defeated in Wei River City, their connection with the Central Plains was cut off by us. No matter how elite they are, as long as they can't cross the Wei River, they are like rootless duckweeds. Their arrows and rations are getting less and less because there are no lone troops on this plain. They are either hordes of demon beasts or demi-human troops, a large number of auxiliary troops from my southern expedition, or the Fallen Star Army that broke their mentality. Therefore, they can't get any supplies at all. Of course, you may ask me why they don't bully the Shuangjian barbarian. In fact, the answer is very simple. Because the Shuangjian barbarian are now poorer and more miserable than them. At least there are some supplies stored in the Wei River City tunnels for them to maintain. But what can the Shuangjian barbarian eat after their rations and horses? They were so hungry that they wanted to eat people. Thirdly, based on the above situation, Shen Linjun's reserve force is currently using the tactic of breaking up the entire force and trying to infiltrate all parts of the northern frontier territory. They are waiting for the Shenwu dynasty to use them in the future. However, the northern frontier territory is currently being cleaned up and all the resources have been moved to the hinterland of the northern frontier. The northern frontier prince's mansion is in charge of the distribution of the resources, and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is personally escorting them. Therefore, it is a complete joke for them to try to infiltrate the place. Not to mention all kinds of supplies, they might not even be able to find people. That's why the *T of breaking up into smaller groups and sneaking into other places is just to fool people. They split up into various small groups simply because their main group can't support so many people. They can only be separated and left to fend for themselves. That's why we've only encountered some abandoned remnants. That's why they don't dare to show themselves even now. Zhong Xiuzhu stretched out his hand and pointed at the dense forest in front of them. He grinned and said, "What you're facing now isn't the world's number one. It's just a group of defeated and abandoned dregs. Can anyone tell me how we're going to lose against such dregs?" Pa. 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 Zhong Xiuzhu stretched out his hand and slapped his face as he spoke. He said coldly, "We can't lose this battle, and we can't lose. Anyway, Zhong Xiuzhu, can't afford to lose face like this. I think everyone here can't afford to lose face like this either. Fight to the death. Fight to the death." Zhong Xiuzhu's method of mobilizing the troops' morale wasn't brilliant, but it was very clever. Firstly, he directly stated that with their strength, they would definitely be annihilated if they engaged in hand-to-hand combat. This made certain people who were eager to gain merit and disregarded the consequences would have no choice but to obediently stay behind the fortifications and listen to Zhong Xiuzhu's arrangements. Secondly, Zhong Xiuzhu fully analyzed the situation of the troops opposite them. In an atmosphere of near despair, he forcibly described the reserves of the world's number one army as smelly trash. This allowed them to see the dawn of victory in their despair. Thirdly, Zhong Xiuzhu bluntly called the other party dregs. If he lost this battle, wouldn't it mean that their team was even worse than dregs? No one was willing to lose face. Even Zhong Xiuzhu, who had lost both his parents and begged from door to door every day when he was young. Zhong Xiuzhu, who relied on hundreds of families to survive, couldn't afford to lose face like this. Not only would these people, who had relatives and friends, die in society, but even their relatives and friends would also be unable to raise their head. Pa! Pa! Hearing the shouts around him, Zhong Xiuzhu gently clapped his hands to signal for everyone to be quiet. He smiled and said, "All right, although these dregs have become the first step to our fame, if we want to win this battle, we still have to follow my arrangement. Now, let's bury the pot and cook." Heh! The corner of Yu Dingchen's mouth twitched violently again. What the F***ck is he playing at? First, he stirred up the morale of the troops with a set of twists and turns. This bastard actually didn't take advantage of this time to do anything meaningful. Instead, he wanted the troops to bury the pot and cook, as if everyone had been hungry all this time. I know, you guys don't know why I want you to bury the pot and cook. Actually, I don't want to explain it. Zhong Xiuzhu watched the troops begin to prepare, then he smiled and said, "But just in case, I advise you guys to use this time to adjust the crossbows and familiarize yourself with the swords. Otherwise, when those guys rush out later, you guys won't even be able to withstand the first round. Those Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers inside don't know when the last time they had a proper meal is. If we cook here, once the aroma spreads out, it would be strange if they obediently watch." Awesome team! After a short moment of silence, a young soldier suddenly yelled out. Even if they were on the plains, they might not be able to beat him, let alone in the dense forest with complicated terrain. These Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers had been on guard for the past 2 days. Zhong Xiuzhu really didn't have the confidence to take down this tough bone. After all, they were a group of elite soldiers. If they only relied on the geographical advantage of the dense forest to defend themselves, even if Li Zhongxing and his personal guards came over, there was no way they could win this battle. However, these Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers didn't attack them because they hated the people from the northern frontier. From the very beginning, their goal was to escort this batch of supplies. After all, the transport team of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce wasn't something that a group of defeated soldiers could challenge in terms of size and strength. Therefore, the Frost Mirror Cavalry wasn't the only ones who couldn't get supplies. Chapter 520. The supply troops brought back 2 bags of food that were scattered outside the attack range of the forest. They quickly started cooking. However, the rest of the troops didn't chat like they usually did when they were waiting for their meals. Instead, they silently used whetstones to test the sharpness of their weapons. A group of soldiers with strange crossbows were squatting behind the simple fortifications. They were all listening to the movements on the other side of the fortifications. To them, the enemy that attacked first was nothing but prey. "Brother Yu, what did your team leader say?" Qiu Teng, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, turned his head and asked Yu Dingchen. His face was pale from fear. He didn't know who the ambushers in the forest were, but they definitely weren't the Frost Mirror Cavalry. The arrows they used weren't the arrows of the Frost Mirror grassland. Even if the Frost Mirror Cavalry were starving, they wouldn't attack their own people. "Our commander said that there's a group of troublesome enemies hiding in the forest ahead. If we rush in and engage them in hand-to-hand combat, we'll lose without a doubt." Yu Dingchen chewed on the jerky in his hand as he spoke slowly. "But their target is our supplies. If we start cooking here, they'll take the risk and rush out of the forest to attack us. At that time, we can rely on the fortifications to kill them one by one." The reason Yu Dingchen was eating jerky wasn't because he had the privilege of an officer. It was because 500 of them, including him, were chosen to be Shenlin Jun's reserve troops. They were the last line of defense near the fortifications. Once that happened, they had to rush out and engage the enemy in hand-to-hand combat to buy time and space for the archers behind them to kill the enemy. "Then, did your team leader say who the other party was?" Qiu Teng looked at the jerky in Yu Dingchen's hand and swallowed his saliva as he asked in a low voice. Because Zhong Xiuzhu was a meticulous person, he always remembered what his persona was. Even when he was trying to boost morale, he was still using the code words of the Northern Frontier Army. Therefore, from what Qiu Ting heard, the mute general was constantly telling his troops unknown numbers, and yet he was still able to stir up everyone's emotions. That was why Qiu Ting asked this question out of curiosity. It wasn't that he hadn't thought that the enemy in the forest was the army of the northern region, but Zhong Xiuzhu and his men had reacted too quickly. The sentries who had gone into the forest to scout the situation hadn't even come out in a dozen breaths. They had immediately overturned the supply wagons and withstood the first salvo. Qiu Ting did not believe that this was Zhong Xiuzhu's prediction. After all, if such an outstanding general was placed in the Shuangjian dynasty, he would at least be a major commander who commanded tens of thousands of cavalry. He would not be a direct subordinate of only 5 people. All of this seemed like a script that the northern frontier had prepared in advance, but after giving it some thought, Qiu Ting felt that this wasn't the case. If the Northern Territory wanted to send people to disguise themselves as other troops to ambush and kill, they would first have to let these people see the other party's armor or identification. Then, while they were charging in, they would also make sure to leave behind some of the more important people among them as witnesses to report back to the empire. This would infuriate the Reflection Frost dynasty. However, the enemy had no intention of showing up until now. Moreover, the previous attacks had no intention of leaving anyone alive. The only reason they were able to survive the first round of attacks was because of their cultivation and riding skills. After dodging the scythe of the Grim Reaper, they were able to roll and crawl behind the temporary fortifications. Phut! Yu Dingchen sneered and narrowed his eyes. The Shuangjian dynasty might not have many spies, but that doesn't mean they don't know anything about the Frost Mirror Plains, right? Young clan leader, how many troops do you think there are in the north that can be considered troublesome to deal with? Aside from the Shuangjian dynasty's Blood Liao Knights, the only force that could influence the north was Shenlin Jun. Thinking of this, Qiu Teng's lips trembled. He whispered, "Are you guys crazy? How dare we challenge Shenlin Jun with just the few of us? No wonder your team leader said that if we fought hand to hand, you would lose without a doubt." At this point, Qiu Ting's expression changed slightly and he continued, "Also, if it really is the Divine Forest Army, your crossbow bolts may not be able to penetrate their armor. Fighting a positional battle is only delaying them a little. If this continues, we will all die." Yu Dingchen shook his head and smiled. "What Shenlin Jun? They are just a bunch of defeated soldiers who have abandoned their armor. Not to mention that their armor might not be useful, even if it could block our arrows, they wouldn't have the guts to wear it. After all, the Divine Forest Army's reserve force had already been crushed by Gao Jie. The group of soldiers who had escaped were already in a state of panic. When the army couldn't afford to feed so many people, not only would they be chased out of the group, even the armor or training uniform that could prove their identity would be taken away. If the defeated soldiers were to flee in the north, they would encounter the Northern Frontier Army sooner or later. If a few powerful characters appeared, it would be easy for them to calculate the movement path of the defeated soldiers based on where they appeared. Then, they would be able to annihilate them. As a precaution, when the defeated soldiers were kicked out of the group, everything that could prove their identity would be taken away. When a tiger lost its claws and teeth, and an elephant lost its skin, these so-called fierce beasts, what was there to be afraid of? At this point, Yu Dingchen raised the jerky in his hand and said with a smile, "There's also this food. After eating it, you'll have to rush out and engage in close combat with the enemy when they're close enough to buy time for the archers behind. I see that you have been staring at it. Do you want to eat?" Qiu's expression changed slightly. While he grew up in a harsh environment like the Frost Mirror grassland and was at the pinnacle of the airborne realm, as the young chief of the Green Fish tribe, how much danger could he have encountered? Many years of living like a prince had long since wiped away the courage in Qiu's body, and what little courage he had left was not enough to support his courage to charge out and engage in close combat with the enemy after knowing the identity of the enemy. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, Qiu shook his head very calmly. It was obvious that he had overcome his appetite. They were all elite soldiers, so they carried out orders very quickly. It didn't take long for the aroma of the stewed rice to spread. Not only did it spread to the jungle, but even the simple fortifications had many people drooling. However, Everyone knew that the cooking was just to lure the enemy out. At the very least, they had to wait until the upcoming battle was over before they could enjoy the meal. Chapter 521. About 500 miles away from the fortifications. Xiao Yan, who had tied his long blonde hair behind his head, leaned against a tree trunk next to him and raised his hand to signal for them to stop. Nearly 5,000 tree elves quickly stopped and squatted on the tree trunks, clenching the black composite boughs in their hands. Further away, nearly 10,000 soldiers riding various yarrow beasts also put on their helmets and faceplates again, clenching their spears and halberds, waiting for Commander Xiao Yan's next order. They were the demi-human troops under Xiao Yan's direct command. Although they were not counted as part of the army of the northern frontier, their contribution in this war was not small. Once the war was over, they could quickly get rid of their temporary status and become the first regular army composed of demi-humans in the nominally human-led forces. They would no longer be the slave soldiers and cannon fodder they used to be. For the entire demi-human race, this change was obviously rare and commendable. It was worth it for them to risk their lives for it. Lin Yuan's voice slowly sounded in their minds. 500 miles ahead, a southern expedition is preparing for battle. Quickly move to the battlefield and prepare for support. But remember, this battle does not belong to your troops. Unless your allies are about to be wiped out, you and your subordinates are not allowed to intervene. Yes. Xiao Yan cupped his hands toward the void in front of him, a touch of excitement appearing on his cold face. Their original mission was to wander between the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment and Eastwood City. They were supposed to kill the reservists of the Divine Forest Army and the exiles of the Frost Mirror Cavalry to ensure that these people would not affect Eastwood City's Great Wall plan. But this time, Lin Yuan personally gave the order, which meant that they could end this boring and tedious work. They could soon enter the battlefield and prove to the human soldiers that their demi-human army was also powerful. Everyone, stay hidden and follow me. Remember, don't attack without my order. Xiao Yan waved his hand and gave a few instructions to the subordinates around him. Soon, a herald flew out with a flag signal. This war machine composed of more than 10,000 demi-humans was once again in operation. In Shunning City, Ding Zai stood beside Lin Yuan with a smile and said in a deep voice, Lord Dragon King is indeed an ambitious and ruthless man, playing the Shuangjin dynasty and Shunwu dynasty in the palm of your hand. Every move of yours is like a calm chess player, precise, deadly, and elegant. Stop your flattery. Li Zhong, who was sitting on the throne, interrupted Ding Zai's flattery and sneered, I heard that Shanglu Association is very dissatisfied with a subordinate like you who played a good hand so badly. Originally, they wanted to execute you, but seeing that you still worked hard, they sent you on another mission to atone for your crimes. I think, your mission isn't to come to the northern frontier to flatter our Dragon King, right? Lin Yuan also coldly glanced at Ding Zai. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning was very clear, carrying a bit of warning. Ding Zai's face slightly stiffened. He looked at Li Zhong with some fear, a cold light flashing in his eyes. Shanglu Association was a top faction after all. Their every move was hidden in the inner layer of the world. Even if they were doing something, countless people would use superficial skills to cover it up. If it wasn't for internal members leaking information, outsiders would definitely not know about Shanglu Association's actions. Now that Li Zhong had seen through his disguise so easily, it was obvious that he had received some information in advance. Either the Shifter Emperor Association's spies had already infiltrated Shanglu Association, and their status shouldn't be low. Otherwise, they wouldn't know about the higher-ups' opinions on how to deal with him. Or, there were people in Shanglu Association who wished for Ding Zai's death. Before he arrived at the northern frontier, they had already leaked information to the northern frontier, letting Lin Yuan and Li Zhong know that he came with a mission that he had to complete. Because of this, they would have a bad impression of him. At the very least, all the channels of persuasion and flattery to repair the relationship between the two sides were blocked. Is Shanglu Association dissatisfied with this king's division of benefits, or? Lin Yuan finally opened his mouth, and there was some indifference in his tone. He wasn't afraid that Shanglu Association would fall out with him. After all, he wasn't strong enough. In this incident, he was only playing the role of cutting the cake. He didn't even eat much of the cake. All he could do was lick the cream on his knife. If Shanglu Association wasn't satisfied with this division of benefits, then they wouldn't be challenging Lin Yuan. Instead, they would be challenging the huge interest group formed by the other top factions. In the face of such a level of power, even if Shanglu Association was a top faction, it was just a building that could be crushed at any time. Ding Zai shook his head lightly and sneered. Dragon King, you are overthinking. Although I am indeed here with a mission, this matter won't affect you or me. In fact, it is an enemy that you have to face. By informing you in advance, I am doing your northern frontier a huge favor. It will prevent you from being overwhelmed. Speaking up to this point, Ding Zai cast a sidelong glance at Li Zhong. The sneer on his face deepened. I originally wanted to repair the relationship between the two sides. After all, I am a vice president of the Association of the Demon the Arch. If I could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon the Arch, then I would have more authority in Shanglu Association. In some decisions, I would naturally be more biased towards the northern frontier. Unfortunately, it seems like I was overthinking. Lin Yuan and Li Zhong both looked at Ding Zai with indifferent expressions. They didn't seem to be moved at all. Among the three people present, which one of them wasn't a demon? If Ding Zai could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon the Arch, he would indeed be biased towards them in Shanglu Association's decisions regarding the northern frontier. However, that was only because with a powerful association of the Demon the Arch, Ding Zai's power would be greater. Both sides were in a relationship of mutual benefit and prosperity. It wasn't like Ding Zai's tone sounded like he was only looking out for the northern frontier. Ahem, then I will be direct. This time, I came to the northern frontier to inform you of the news. It is Lei Qiusheng's trump card. Because you, Lin Yuan, had previously led the evil sect members to the south, Lei Qiusheng had found a very suitable target to push the blame to. As such, we can no longer intervene. This matter can also be said to be you lifting a rock and smashing it on your own feet. Therefore, before the northern frontier is destroyed and things become completely out of control, we will not directly intervene. Ding Zai cleared his throat. Clearly, he didn't expect that Lin Yuan and Li Zhong didn't have any intention of giving him a way out. With resentment in his heart, Ding Zai didn't even use honorifics. Looking at Lin Yuan and Li Zhong, there was even a hint of pity in his eyes. Don't talk nonsense. Li Zhong's face darkened as he growled in a low voice. Chapter 522. The reason why Lei Qiusheng dared to tear the Shunwu dynasty apart is actually very simple. It's because his trump card isn't an army or powerful cultivators. It's because he obtained support that he shouldn't have. With their existence, let alone the Shunwu dynasty, it's not impossible for him to sweep through the world if we don't interfere. The Dragon King is an existence from the ancient demon court. I think in the documents you obtained, there should be something called the Sky Demon recorded. It is the same as the Dragon race and the Kirin race today, an existence from the other side of the Celestial Gate. And unlike the former, these Sky Demons do not have any goodwill towards us. In their eyes, all living things are just food. Lei Qiusheng's trump card is that he has a relationship with a terrifying Sky Demon. When necessary, as long as Lei Qiusheng can give enough sacrifices, he can summon a group of powerful Sky Demons to fight for him. And during this period of war, countless souls have become sacrifices for Lei Qiusheng to please the Sky Demon. In other words, he does not need to make any preparations to pull in the Sky Demon army in the south. After these Sky Demons eat all the living things in the south, they will regain part of their rationality. In this way, Lei Qiusheng can command the Sky Demon army through that powerful existence. For example, he can let them bypass the Central Plains and attack the northern frontier, Frost Mirror, and Xinjiang. Ding Zai shook his head and smiled bitterly. In order to shut our mouths, Lei Qiusheng pushed this matter to the evil cult in the south and pointed the reason for the evil cult entering the south to you. Therefore, it is not good for us to interfere. In addition, you are the successor of the demon court, so you naturally have the obligation to deal with these dirty guys. So, Li Zhong digested the information and said with a dark face, because you are afraid of trouble, you decided to let us fight with Lei Qiusheng? To put it bluntly, that is indeed the case. Ding Zai put his hands behind his back and said in a deep voice, in our original plan, once Lei Qiusheng is forced into a corner, he will naturally summon the Sky Demon army. At that time, we can legitimately interfere and directly wipe out the Sky Demon and Lei Qiusheng. But now, according to the higher-ups, you caused the trouble, so you have to deal with it yourselves. At this point, Ding Zai paused. Seeing that the man and the Sky Demon had no intention of acting up, he continued, of course, we will support them from the outside. The chaos of the Sky Demon can only occur in the Shunwu dynasty. Once the northern frontier is destroyed, or the Sky Demon leave the Shunwu dynasty's territory, we will immediately eliminate them. Ding Zai's meaning was that the life and death of the northern frontier had nothing to do with them. When he finished speaking, Ding Zai had already planned to leave. After all, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong did not give him any face. Right now, he could not wait for the northern frontier to be destroyed, so that he could wash away the humiliation on his body. If you walk out like that, I can guarantee that even if I don't do anything to you, the Upper Deer Association will destroy your soul. Lin Yuan's voice suddenly sounded behind Ding Zai. Ding Zai's movements paused slightly, a layer of cold sweat suddenly appeared on his forehead. This was because the term soul dispersing did not belong to the Sky Martial continent. It was the highest punishment that the top powers would use to deal with their enemies, traitors, and trash. Once someone was included in this list, even their soul would be completely destroyed. Although Lin Yuan could tell from his innate ability to summon the Netherrealm's black water that there was no underworld in this world, there was still a law that guided the souls and the dead in this world to reincarnate. And from the fact that there were no demons and monsters in this world, this law was much more effective than the so-called underworld. Once the soul was destroyed, it was equivalent to being completely erased from this world. It would be impossible to reincarnate or become a yin spirit. It was a punishment that was even more severe than death. The Upper Deer Association also benefits from this, so it's not good for us to directly interfere. It doesn't mean that we won't interfere. If you refuse to carry out the mission given by the higher-ups, you will die a horrible death, and even your soul will not be able to escape. Lin Yuan's voice sounded again, like the whispers of a demon from the underworld lying on a human's shoulder. Ding Zai turned around and was about to speak when Lin Yuan interrupted him again. I have the means to deal with the Sky Demon, so I don't need you to provide me with the weapons needed to kill the Sky Demon. But after destroying the Sky Demon's body, my army must have the demon-suppressing weapon to ensure that all the dead Sky Demons will be captured and brought to me. According to the inheritance of the underwater secret realm, the Sky Demon was actually a spiritual body similar to a ghost. They could invade other worlds at will, but they did not have a physical body. They could only use the method of seducing life forms to possess them. Then, they would fulfill the desires of the possessed person and devour the other person's soul. After achieving their goal of taking over the other person's nest, they would become a real threat to the creatures of this world. Of course, the Sky Demon needed time to nourish his body and recover his strength. He could not possess just anyone he saw. Only those with strong resentment, hatred, and other negative emotions would become the target of his seduction. Neutral and peaceful creatures would not be able to sense the existence of the Sky Demon at all. This was an extremely troublesome thing, but it was also extremely easy to deal with. For example, the current citizens of the northern frontier were much happier than before. Naturally, they were in good shape and would not give the Sky Demon any chance to take advantage of them. Thus, in theory, as long as all the creatures in the territory were happy, the Sky Demon would never breed. However, for the Shunwu dynasty, the continuous battles and hopeless predicament caused the citizens of the Shunwu dynasty to develop a large number of negative emotions. This could be said to be a breeding ground for the Sky Demon. The most troublesome thing about the Sky Demon was that they were spiritual bodies. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they would not die. At most, their minds would be injured and they would transform into formless objects to escape. After a period of time, they would possess a new physical body and become a new Sky Demon warrior. However, it was obvious that not everyone had a way to see and attack spiritual bodies. If they did not have the demon-suppressing weapon developed by the Heavenly Gate Guardian, these Sky Demon warriors would not be destroyed even if they died 100 times. They would be able to wear down the citizens of the northern frontier. What was even more frightening was that once they fell into a quagmire of war that they could not see any hope of winning, the citizens of the northern frontier would develop all sorts of negative emotions. In the timeline of the Tianwu continent, who knew how many powerful forces had been destroyed because of the Sky Demon that could not be killed? However, Lin Yuan's Netherrealm Black Water could be said to be the nemesis of the Sky Demon. The more Sky Demon he pulled in, the more powerful Lin Yuan's natural endowments would be. However, it was obvious that he could not appear anywhere in the northern frontier at any time. It was even more impossible for him to deal with the Sky Demon army that was attacking from all sides. Chapter 523. This condition is acceptable, but the Deer Association's ability is limited. We can't equip all your troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Even if we join forces with the other top factions, we can only equip every 5,000 troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Ding Zai spread out his hands and frowned. Lei Qiusheng summoning the Sky Demon army is just a small matter to the entire Sky Martial continent. The enemy we have to face is even more ferocious, and even if we have extra demon-suppressing artifacts, we can use them to replace the damaged ones at any time. Yes. Lin Yuan nodded slightly. An enemy that could pin down all the top experts of the Sky Martial continent was indeed terrifying. Even the current Lin Yuan felt a headache when facing the Sky Demon army, but these top forces had to face opponents that were even more ferocious and powerful than the Sky Demon. At the same time, they had to deploy a portion of their people to monitor the entire Sky Martial continent at all times to prevent the enemy from stabbing them in the back. Including the demon-suppressing artifacts in the inherited memories, as well as the information about the world on the other side of the Heaven Gate, they were not created out of thin air. Countless creatures had paid the price of blood to accumulate this information bit by bit. It was also because of this unyielding spirit and sacrifice that the Sky Martial continent was able to maintain its current prosperous and peaceful appearance. The history of the creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate tens of thousands of years ago had already been sealed in the long river of history by all the top forces. Unless one reached a certain realm or had an ancient inheritance, they would not be able to obtain any information. However, Ding Zai's gaze paused on Lin Yuan for a moment, and his tone became respectful again. You said that you have a way to deal with the Sky Demon. Do you mean to seal them, or? The Sky Demon was a large race of creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate. Their fighting strength was not considered strong, and because they had an almost unlimited lifespan, the Sky Demon's cultivation speed was also abnormally slow. Other than under certain circumstances, if a Sky Demon wanted to directly affect the material world, they still needed a physical body. The stronger the Sky Demon, the higher the aptitude of the physical body, and the longer the time needed to recover their strength. However, the Sky Demon had no qualms about invading the Sky Martial continent because the cultivators of the Sky Martial continent did not have the ability to kill them. Even if they managed to find a devil-suppressing artifact that could seal the Sky Demon's spiritual body, the cultivators of the Martial Heaven continent could only bury the devil-suppressing artifact in some forbidden areas and then set up all kinds of traps and formations to ensure that no living beings would approach. Releasing the Sky Demon was just a way to imprison him. These sealed Sky Demons were still a huge threat because the Sky Demons could sense each other. Once a Sky Demon broke through the defenses set up by the cultivators, it would be very easy for the sealed Sky Demon to be released. Such cases were not rare. You can say that I killed him. Lin Yuan's different-colored eyes curved slightly, like a pair of crescent moons. He said calmly, they will exist in another form, but they will not casually threaten the living beings of the Sky Martial continent. Furthermore, the other Sky Demon will not be able to find them. Even if they find them, they will be treated as enemies. Was there a better method to deal with the Sky Demon than the STYX? As long as they dared to face Lin Yuan head-on, however many Sky Demons there were, they would be able to devour as many Sky Demons as there were. Lin Yuan's Netherrealm's Black Water would become longer and wider because of this. The Sky Demon that was pulled into the Netherrealm's Black Water would not die, but they would become Lin Yuan's most loyal warriors. Even if they encountered their own kind, they would be pulled into the Nether Realm's black water to accompany them. Then, let's wait and see. Ding Zai bowed slightly to Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, "We have sealed many Sky Demon all these years, but we have never been able to completely kill them. In recent years, due to the deaths of some powerful beings and the extinction of their forces, some ancient forbidden areas have already lost control. We suspect that the powerful sky demon that Lei Choshan contacted is most likely an ancient sky demon that broke out of the seal. Be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, Ding Zai left King Shunning's residence and quickly headed south. Li Zhong walked behind Lin Yuan and asked with a frown, "Dragon King, do you think this person's words can be trusted?" Li Zhong was born in a poor family, and there were no outstanding cultivators among his ancestors. In addition, all the top forces had joined hands to create an information blockade. If he was not loyal to Lin Yuan, he would never have come into contact with these things. If he came into contact with them, it would mean that the Sky Martial continent was finished. Therefore, Li Zhong would not express his own opinion on this matter, because an outsider was an outsider. Every word he said could affect Lin Yuan to make the wrong decision. Therefore, he could only remind Lin Yuan that Ding Zai was not trustworthy. Even if both sides were using each other, they had to be on guard in advance to avoid falling into the trap of others. 70% true, 30% false. Lin Yuan's smiling eyes returned to normal. He asked, "Is there any news from the south?" Li Zhong nodded slightly. After hesitating for a while, he frowned and said, "Qin Yu sent a message saying that a new force has appeared in the south. It seems to be called Jade Lake Immortal Palace. After investigation, it is confirmed that this Jade Lake Immortal Palace has released a kind of immortal elixir called Jade Lake Immortal Elixir. It is said that after persuading, one can leave their physical body and become an immortal. Then the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will provide a new young physical body for the immortal, helping them break free from the shackles of their lifespan. Do you believe it?" Lin Yuan's voice contained a bit of a smile, but his expression did not change in the slightest. Li Zhong did not hesitate this time. He shook his head decisively and said in a cold voice, "There is no such thing as a free benefit in this world. I heard that the Jade Lake Immortal Palace does not take any benefits and gives the so-called immortal elixir to the cultivators who come to their door for free. Anyone with a bit of brain knows that this is a huge trap. Being able to let cultivators break free from their physical body that was about to decay due to the end of their lifespan and change into a new physical body to move about in the world was something that all cultivators dreamed of. After all, even the Imperial Sky Realm to the Heaven Star Realm could be said to be one step at a time. There were many cultivators who were stuck at a bottleneck and died. Even Beast Lord Kirin, who was said to be at the peak of the mortal world, was like this, not to mention other people with mediocre talent. If one could obtain an immortal lifespan, then there would be more possibilities. Perhaps one could really break into the next realm, but there was such a good thing that could be enjoyed without paying any price. Only those who were about to die and were unwilling to die and those brainless idiots would believe it. Chapter 524. It seems like our Black Jiao Beast King isn't interested in the elixir of immortality. Before Lin Yuan could say anything, a deep voice rang out. In the next moment, a Kirin the size of a small pony with a dark green body appeared in front of Li Zhong. Although it hadn't fully manifested itself, the powerful aura it exuded shocked Li Zhong so much that he couldn't speak. With such an appearance and such strength, there was only one existence in the entire Hengduan mountain range that fit the criteria: the Beast King Kirin Incubus. Lin Yuan was silent for a moment before he neutralized Kirin's aura. He chuckled and said, "Senior, you have inherited the memories from your bloodline. Naturally, you know better than me what the elixir of immortality is. Why are you teasing a junior like me?" Yarrow beasts were a race that paid attention to bloodlines. This was because their bloodline didn't only contain power, but also the memories engraved by their ancestors. Once their strength reached a certain level, these memories would awaken. Therefore, true descendants of divine beasts didn't need to worry about cultivation techniques at all. Once they reached a certain level, they would naturally obtain the techniques that belonged to their ancestors. Everyone thought that the Beast King Kirin was stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm because he couldn't find the door. Only a few people knew that if he wanted to, he could break through to the next level at any time. It was just that he didn't do so. According to Lin Yuan's train of thought, the Beast King Kirin's style was more like the main characters in the novels in his previous life. They didn't want to copy the path of their ancestors because it was a path that belonged to others. Even if they walked step by step, they would only reach the peak of their ancestors. It would be a fool's dream to go further. As for the Beast Master Qilin, it was not satisfied with being at the peak of the desolate demon realm. It was ambitious and wanted to carve out a path that belonged to itself. That was why it had been stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm for so long. It was because of its talent and ambition. If it really couldn't do anything, it could still choose to accept the gifts from its ancestors and steadily break through to extend its lifespan. The reason Kirin was choosing the next Beast Master was not because he was dying, but because he had already reached the threshold during his seclusion. Therefore, he could not wait to come out of seclusion and choose the next Beast Master who could continue the inheritance of the Hengduan mountain range. He would then embark on his own path that he did not know the end of. Incubus nodded slightly and chuckled. I don't believe that you are the successor of the demon court, but your soul does not belong to this world. You have the aura of the origin world, but it is not pure. I also know that everything you have today cannot be separated from some special existence. Incubus's words were very natural, but Lin Yuan vaguely felt that it had some kind of incredible magical power. That was because Li Zhong's face did not show any surprise when such terrifying news came from its mouth. Suddenly, Lin Yuan had an absurd thought. It seemed that the omnipotent system did not even hear its word. Only you and I can hear what I am going to say next. In order to not be noticed by some special existence, you only need to listen. Don't show anything strange on your face. First of all, I have to congratulate you for successfully deceiving the rules of this world. Other than an extremely special existence like me, or a powerful person who has already deduced your roots, no one will be able to see your origin. That is because the intricate karma on your body has already covered your soul, which is incompatible with this world. But you don't have to be happy because your origin is a hidden danger that must be eliminated for some existence, especially the things on the other side of the divine gate that they mentioned. They will covet you even more because they want to find the origin world even in their dreams. Because you come from the origin world, I will not say any more nonsense. Whether it is me, the inheritance of this world, or the things on the other side of the divine gate, they all come from a place that you know, the chaos. Incubus still maintained a calm attitude when it said these words. But Lin Yuan, who heard these words, had to try his best to suppress the excitement in his heart so that he would not show anything strange. The chaos. That was the origin of everything. Any creature from there was an immortal myth. If everything was related to the chaos, then the way back to the past world could indeed be found through the divine gate. The timeline of my ancestors was the first cultivation tribulation of the chaos. The so-called war between the three races was the battle between the dragons, phoenixes, and Kirin. However, the final winner of that war was not the demonic beasts of the three races, nor was it the Luo who appeared out of nowhere. It was the old man, Hongjun. After that war, Hongjun took control of the way of heaven. Nominally, he rewarded and punished all the existences who participated in that cultivation tribulation, but his purpose was just to steal the way of heaven. After Hongjun obtained the great merits and was canonized as a sage, the chaos became his sole authority. The so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address Hongjun as their teacher. Those who did not obey him would never have the chance to become a sage. After that, it was the second cultivation tribulation, which was the war between the shamans and the demons. It started with ancestor sorcerer Gonggong knocking down Mount Buzhou. Then, the 7 sages, including Hongjun, used various means to mend the heavens. After that, the war between the shamans and the demons broke out. But the real purpose was just to deceive the public. We once again shattered the chaos world, mixed our bloodline with the fragments of the world, escaped into the void, and escaped from Hongjuan's enslavement. In order to live freely, too many of our ancestors have sacrificed themselves. In the past few years, we have also been hunted down countless times by Hongjun's lackeys. I don't know how our compatriots who have escaped to other places are doing, but the Sky Marshal continent where our race is located can be considered to be in imminent danger. However, the heavenly divination, one of them escaped. Even Hongjun, who stole the heavenly Tao, could not control everything. I don't know when it started, but an unknown force shrouded this world, making it difficult for Hongjun to infiltrate the Qianwu continent. And after these years of reproduction, that unknown force started to act strangely. I couldn't find a result no matter how much I tried. It was until you appeared that I was sure that the force was related to you. Although I don't have any evidence, I can be sure that the force that isolated Hongjun came from the source world. And you are the destined person to face the tribulation. Sooner or later, you will return to the chaos world and push Hongjun down from his throne. Incubus's voice still did not reveal any joy or sadness. Lin Yuan looked at Incubus quietly. He wanted to say something several times but stopped himself. There was no other reason. Incubus's words had a huge impact on him. It was as if all the myths he knew had been overturned. But Incubus's words did not seem to be baseless. Because after Hongjun became a sage, the so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address him as teacher. Chapter 525. The races that once dominated the untainted land did not rise again after the Great War of the 3 races. After the Great War of the witches and demons shattered the untainted land, the old forces were almost completely wiped out. Only then did the weak human race become the hegemon, giving rise to a series of subsequent myths and legends. The human race was originally a race created by Nuer. Strictly speaking, they were inextricably linked to Hongjun. Autumn beans fell. Lin Yuan adjusted his breathing and began to sort out the huge amount of information in Incubus's words. So my system is actually the so-called power of the source world, which is one of the powers that Hongjun has yet to control? If I follow this train of thought, then the 3rd cataclysm of the untainted land, which is the battle between the sages, is also a conspiracy. Is the heaven that the founder of Tongtian who teaches everyone without discrimination actually the original heavenly Tao? Because the founder of Tongtian was unwilling to be controlled by Hongjun, the 3rd cataclysm shattered the untainted land, causing the so-called source world to escape with the fragments. And the founder of Tongtian's subordinates were mostly demons, who were basically the remnants of the old forces. Because in the 2nd cataclysm, the witches and demons broke away from Hongjuan's control by shattering the untainted land. Even though they were constantly being hunted down by Hongjun, the heavenly Tao that was about to be completely controlled by Hongjun saw the hope of survival. If not for the fact that he had to maintain a calm appearance, Lin Yuan would have gasped at this moment. However, the so-called 3rd cataclysm was definitely not something that Incubus and the other demons who had escaped during the 2nd cataclysm knew about. No wonder the science and technology on Earth had developed rapidly. The so-called metaphysics, ghosts and gods had always been listed as feudal superstitions. Even the so-called untainted land was listed as an unverifiable myth. Even the history of Huaxia, which had been passed down for more than 5,000 years, stopped at the Zhou dynasty. Even if everyone knew about the existence of the untainted land, no one could find any evidence. This was the heavenly Tao of the source world. It was erasing Hongjuan's existence, ensuring that Hongjun would not be able to discover the source world. From Lin Yuan's memories of the original world, it seemed that the Way of Heaven had already done quite well in this aspect. Furthermore, it had even begun to fight against Hongjun and the primordial world. The old forces such as Ravenhill Manor and the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas had actually already established a connection with the source world. However, not many people knew about it, and Lin Yuan, an anomaly from the source world, was one of them. In that case, what exactly was his system? The will of the heavenly Tao of the source world. If he thought about it this way, it did not seem impossible. The system had disguised itself well, and it was indeed no different from the systems in novels. However, it obviously had its own will and judgment, and it seemed that there was nothing it could not do or not know. Other than the reasonable explanation that it was the Way of Heaven, even an advanced alien civilization was not enough to prove that it was magical. This was because it was not making Lin Yuan stronger or giving Lin Yuan wealth. Its every action could only be explained by miracles. It was molding itself into a powerful god, a god comparable to Hongjun, but it did not want itself to be out of control. Therefore, the system directly labeled the talent of the Nether Realm's Blackwater as dangerous and uncontrollable. If Lin Yuan became stronger through the power of the Nether Realm's Blackwater and became a god who controlled the underworld, then Lin Yuan would no longer be controlled. This was because Lin Yuan was not created by the system. It could not deprive Lin Yuan of his own power. Lin Yuan suddenly thought of the dove snake that had tried to devour the system's power. No wonder the system had changed its usual behavior and destroyed it directly. Based on this information, wasn't Hongjun also a dove snake? However, Hongjun had already succeeded. Out of the 50 great paths, Hongjun had already grasped 4 out of 9. If he controlled the last one, Hongjun would no longer be a saint and would no longer need to hold the title of the Way of Heaven's spokesperson. Because at that time, Hongjun would be the Way of Heaven. But why was he the one who was chosen? With his own strength, how could he challenge the legendary mighty Hongjun? Even if he could defeat Hongjun, would the Way of Heaven allow a second Hongjun to appear? At that time, what would be the outcome waiting for him? Complex thoughts appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. It was only at this time that Lin Yuan dared to think like this. Incubus was now using a secret technique to block the system's perception. If it was under normal circumstances, these thoughts that might be the truth would be enough for the system to directly erase Lin Yuan's existence. It seems that you have thought of a lot. That's right, you are a smart guy. It doesn't matter whether you are intentional or not. In any case, you will get the same information. Incubus still had an emotionless expression as it slowly said, I am not telling you this for benefits. I simply do not wish for a situation like Hongjuan's to happen. You, Hongjun, and the Source World. The three of you are in a tripartite situation. Only then will there be room for us remnants of the old era to survive. Otherwise, our fates will be extremely miserable. Incubus's thoughts were very dark, but it was very similar to the experiences of its ancestors. Since the beginning of the primordial age, the best time for these old powers was before the war between the three races. Whether it was the heavenly Tao that instigated the war, or Hongjun who later plucked the peach, they all saw clearly that the only one in this world they could truly trust was themselves. Now, the Source World had pushed Lin Yuan to compete with Hongjun. If Lin Yuan could have his own strength, then the three parties would form a situation of checks and balances. Only in this situation would they have room to survive. Alright, it has been too long. I should leave. If this continues, it will notice. Incubus lowered its head slightly and said in a low voice, in short, I do not ask you to remember my feelings. However, in my opinion, Hongjun and the Source World have their own plans. You are just like us, a sacrifice. Only if you live can we live. From now on, your every move must be carefully considered. Don't easily fall into a trap. When its voice fell, Lin Yuan only felt his vision blur. When he regained consciousness, Incubus had already disappeared. Only the worried-looking Li Zhong was standing beside him. Lord Dragon King, is what it said true? Li Zhong suddenly asked, causing Lin Yuan to be slightly startled. Could it be that Incubus's secret technique had failed? Did that mean that the system and Li Zhong had heard everything? No, it couldn't be like that. If the system heard these words, there was a 90% chance that the system, which seemed to be the heavenly Tao, would erase his existence. What do you think? Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhong strangely and opened his mouth to swindle him. Chapter 526. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace's public offering of the elixir of immortality might not be able to attract the truly top-notch experts, but the vast majority of middle and low-level cultivators will try their luck. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace, in particular, will let those successful immortals appear and speak. This will undoubtedly greatly increase their credibility. In a short period of time, the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will gather a large number of middle and low-level cultivators to shake the entire situation. At this point, Li Zhong smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said bitterly, The cultivators who take the elixir of immortality will turn into sky demon. They can indeed obtain immortal life, but they will become a sky demon without self. What's the difference between this and direct death? Li Zhong's words made Lin Yuan let out a long breath of turbid air. Clearly, the previous conversation, which was neither long nor short, was not detected by the system. The effect of the secret technique was still present. What Li Zhong and the system heard was another conversation. What made Lin Yuan most excited was that before the incubus left, it left behind a final sentence. Although I don't know how you communicated with the origin before, it has no physical body and can only listen to the voices in other people's hearts. Therefore, I used a secret technique to conceal your thoughts. No matter who it is, no one will be able to wantonly detect your thoughts, unless you want it to hear them. This secret technique that the incubus had paid an unknown price to set up was Lin Yuan's second greatest gain in the past year of being a demon beast. It was comparable to the Nether Realm's black water talent that the dragonization route of unknown origin had brought to Lin Yuan. It doesn't matter. It's just middle and low-level cultivators. The true experts have already seen countless outstanding people fall in the long river of time. They won't believe that the elixir of immortality really exists in this world. Even if it's true, they won't try it. Lin Yuan softly spat out his snake tongue and said with a gloomy gaze, "The world's cultivators seek nothing more than strength and melting, but they can't avoid immortality. However, what they seek is their own immortality, not the immortality given by others." Ah! Li Zhong raised his head in confusion. Death is a very interesting thing. Human warriors like to engage in life and death battles with others, dancing between life and death. This way, they can become even more powerful existences. Fighting with humans, fighting with demonic beasts, they are all pursuing death. They are seeking for a breakthrough in that slim chance of survival. Therefore, what makes cultivators move forward is not cultivation, but death. If they want to pursue immortality, they won't resist the existence of death, because the latter is the best medicine to spur them forward. If immortality can be obtained easily, then what's the point of cultivation? Lin Yuan smiled indifferently and joked, "A bunch of trash who don't know how to cultivate. No matter how many of them there are, they are still trash." Cultivation was a very difficult thing. Without the help of external forces, every realm was a ladder to the heavens. Lin Yuan's own cultivation was like this, and the Northern Frontiers cultivators under his command were also like this. Lin Yuan had never understood why those who were loyal to him could increase their strength so quickly. For example, Li Zhongxing, as a member of Shun Lin Jun's reserve force, although Li Zhongxing was an outstanding person, he was definitely not a monster. However, ever since he came to the Northern Frontier, Li Zhongxing had grown rapidly. Now, he had become one of the top generals in the Northern Frontier, far surpassing those Shun Lin Jun's reserve force who were in the same batch as him. The speed of cultivation could be explained. After all, Lin Yuan was now the largest spiritual item merchant in the Tianwu continent. His subordinates could naturally obtain more and better spiritual items. With the advantage of a huge amount of resources, the Northern Frontiers cultivators could grow much faster than others. Using spiritual items to increase one's cultivation was not a problem, but spiritual items would not directly increase one's combat strength and combat experience. However, after the Northern Frontiers cultivators' strength soared, they could quickly grasp the combat strength of their own realm. They were even more powerful than those unorthodox cultivators. There was also the sudden exposure of the Northern Frontiers aristocratic families and Kang Lezen's secret operation, and the sudden disappearance of the Northern Frontiers sects. These were all unsolved mysteries in Lin Yuan's heart. Until today, Lin Yuan finally got the answer. Because he had the help of heaven. He had the origin of heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, everything went smoothly, and the speed of his subordinate strength was naturally rapid. After all, the strong enemy he had to face was not the Shunwu dynasty or those top forces, but a saint who had stolen the heavenly Tao. Lin Yuan's own strength could not increase slowly, and the existence of his subordinates naturally could not drag him down. Therefore, the entire northern frontier had the heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, the speed of his growth was not something that ordinary people could compare to. What do you mean? Li Zhong seemed to have just reacted. He looked at Lin Yuan with a respectful expression. Withdraw all the spies in the south. If they want to cause trouble, let them cause trouble. Lin Yuan stretched his body and sneered. Originally, I had to make a trip to the West Sea Dragon Palace to clean up the mess for those evil cultists. However, Lei Qiusheng's move to divert the trouble has saved me a lot of trouble. Just wait, those evil cultists are not people who are willing to suffer losses. They have inexplicably taken the blame, and will definitely fight to the death with Lei Qiusheng. Our luck is pretty good. It's all thanks to Lord Dragon King's plan. Li Zhong flattered Lin Yuan neither lightly nor heavily. In fact, in his opinion, everything that happened today was calculated by Lin Yuan in advance. It was just that Lei Qiusheng and Lin Yuan had schemed against each other, and in the end, neither of them had gained much advantage. However, to the northern frontier, not suffering losses was a victory, because the northern frontier was not the one who had to clean up the mess. In the end, Lin Yuan was still better. He could not figure out why Lin Yuan would attribute all of this to illusory luck. If you want to change the plan, how should we deal with the Frost Mirror Cavalry? Li Zhong saw that Lin Yuan had the intention to leave, so he quickened his pace to catch up with him and asked in a low voice. Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong and chuckled. Zhongxiuzhu has already started, and those graduates of the Northern Frontier Military Academy will not watch their classmates rise without doing anything. Since they are willing to do this troublesome thing, then let the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shunlin Jun's reserve troops be the first bones for them to make a name for themselves. Zhongxiuzhu's move to defeat Shunlin Jun's reserve troops had actually gone against Lin Yuan's original intention, forcing him to change the plan. Since things had already come to this point, he would not force it. Before he had enough strength, he could only follow the will of the heavens. Now, he only hoped that the Sky Demon Army could give him enough help so that he could get rid of this puppet status as soon as possible. At the very least, he had to have enough strength to wrestle with him before the system reacted, so that he would not have everything taken away from him in an instant. Chapter 527. They're here. Zhongxiuzhu, who was half squatting on the ground, slowly stood up and tightened his right hand on the handle of his gun. He then growled, "Prepare for battle." Countless footsteps were heard. It was as if the entire ground was trembling under the charge of an unknown number of enemy troops. He knew that he shouldn't have fought this battle. Shunlin Jun's reserve forces had set up ambushes on the road from the defensive line of Donglin City to the Frost Mirror Cavalry camp. There was almost no better situation than this for the entire northern frontier. A few charges and hundreds of lives would have been lost, and they would have been able to return to the defensive line of Donglin City. They would have been able to use the mouths of those Frost Mirror Cavalry generals to direct their hatred to the Shunwu dynasty. However, everyone had their own selfish motives. Zhongxiuzhu knew very well that this was the biggest opportunity he had so far. As long as he could win this battle, he would be able to make a name for himself. When the punishment from the king's residence at the northern frontier came, he would not be killed no matter what. There were only two possible outcomes. The first would be to lead the army to wipe out the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shunlin Jun's reserve forces that were spreading throughout the northern territory. The second would be to remove him from the southern expedition and have him form a new army to defend the border. He would have to suffer the consequences of not being able to kill the Shuangjian dynasty. Clang! Clang! The elite soldiers behind the fortifications quickly got up and aimed their strange-looking crossbows at the charging enemy troops. They then pulled the trigger. One deadly bolt after another was fired. It took only an instant for nearly 10,000 bolts to take down a large number of enemy troops. As expected, the soldiers from Shunlin Jun's reserve forces removed all identifiable symbols from their bodies and wore only white undergarments. Without armor, there was no way they could have withstood the bolts with just a few layers of cloth on their bodies. Furthermore, the crossbows in their hands were anything but ordinary. Those were repeating crossbows that had been painstakingly researched by the Ministry of Works of the Northern region, capable of firing all 30 bolts stored in the crossbow box within a single second. Even sturdy armor might not have been able to withstand 30 consecutive shots. Even the airborne realm warriors, who were shielding their bodies with spiritual chi, ended up with blood splattering all over their bodies. However, this kind of crossbow could be said to be a single-use item. Without a special method, it was impossible to remove the crossbow case. Forcibly removing the crossbow case would only cause part of the mechanism to self-destruct, and the entire crossbow would be destroyed. On the fierce battlefield, without enough logistical support, the emptied crossbows could only be thrown aside, waiting to be picked up when the battlefield was cleaned up to see if they could be used again. Zhong Xiuzhu had emptied all the crossbows he had brought with him in the first round of attacks. He did not consider the problem of suppressing the enemy after that. He wanted to deal the greatest blow when the enemy was unprepared. As it turned out, Zhong Xiuzhu's crazy strategy was indeed successful. After a round of firing, at least 800 of the enemy troops at the front were killed on the spot, and the number of those who were crippled and seriously injured was uncountable. Archers, change your equipment. The shooting position must be used again within 5 breaths. Zhong Xiuzhu called out. Then, he waved his hand and growled, "Swordsmen and shield bearers, what are you waiting for? Do you have to suffer another round of attacks before you know how to build a second defensive position with shields?" In a team of more than 2,000 people, there was no need for semaphore or heralds. With Zhong Xiuzhu's cultivation level close to the heaven's strength realm, he could make all the soldiers hear his orders with his voice alone. However, Zhong Xiuzhu's command was not slow. How could the enemy, as the most elite soldiers of the Shunwu dynasty, be easy to deal with? Almost at the same time Zhong Xiuzhu opened his mouth, a black rain of arrows shot out from the dense forest. Moreover, this attack was an indiscriminate attack. Not only did Zhong Xiuzhu and the others' defensive position, but even the wounded soldiers lying on the ground outside were also enveloped by this rain of arrows. Between soldiers, relationships were very important. Putting aside the fact that they ate and lived together, if they were injured or killed in battle, having 2 more brothers would increase their chances of survival. At the very least, they could ensure that their corpses would be sent back to their hometowns and return to their roots. Therefore, the moment he realized that the enemy was attacking, Zhong Xiuzhu originally wanted to order the whole army to press forward and temporarily abandon the defensive position to stay with the wounded soldiers outside. However, the enemy's abnormal attack made Zhong Xiuzhu stunned for a moment. He could only helplessly accept this loss. He waved his long spear and swept away the arrows that were shot at him. He no longer had the leisure to take care of his other comrades. At the same time, Zhong Xiuzhu became more and more certain that this Shunlin Jun reserve army had reached a stage of desperation. Now, other than killing all the enemies and taking away the supplies for a meal, they did not have any other thoughts. They also did not care about the friendship between comrades. They did not have any food or medicine. Therefore, from the beginning, these wounded soldiers were treated as dead people by them. Puff. In the blink of an eye, a sharp arrow shot into Zhong Xiuzhu's shoulder. Zhong Xiuzhu staggered back 2 steps. He glanced at the soldiers who were in a daze and roared, "Swordsmen and shield soldiers, withstand the arrow rain and build a defensive position. Archers, quickly get into position and prepare to counterattack. What the hell are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the enemy to finish shooting?" Before the 2 sides engaged in hand-to-hand combat, the archers on both sides usually shot at each other. In fact, who was at a disadvantage and who was at an advantage actually depended on the shooting accuracy and shooting frequency of the 2 troops. If they could suppress the enemy behind the defensive fortifications and not dare to show their heads, they could almost achieve 0 casualties and cause a very terrible blow to the enemy. But what were his subordinates doing? Hiding behind the supply wagons and trembling? Strictly speaking, compared to the elite troops of the southern expedition, Shunlin Jun's reserve troops had only practiced a few more times and their general cultivation was higher. However, their battlefield experience was not as good as the soldiers of the southern expedition. However, in this first round of combat, the gap between the 2 sides immediately became obvious. The reason for this was very complicated. The most obvious reason was that Zhong Xiuzhu lacked reputation and military achievements. Even if Zhong Xiuzhu stirred up the morale of the whole army, he himself was just a team leader of the southern expedition. If it were not for Li Zhongxing's favor, Many of the people present would have higher military ranks than Zhong Xiuzhu. Moreover, Zhong Xiuzhu had done almost nothing before except for his good performance in the military academy of the northern frontier. On the other hand, even if the opponent was only a reserve soldier, he was still a reserve soldier of the First Army of the Shunwu dynasty. When the two sides met, the gap in confidence between the two sides was obvious. Although the morale of one side was low, there was no way to retreat. They could only fight with all their might. Their morale was indeed good, but they did not have the confidence to win. Therefore, the moment they made a mistake, it was easy to be beaten like an ostrich. Chapter 528. A pair of sharp eagle eyes lit up. Xiao Yan quietly watched the battlefield 3 kilometers away, the corners of his mouth slightly raised. This motley crew of southern expedition actually had the guts to challenge Shen Linjun's reserves. This was something that Xiao Yan couldn't figure out. What he couldn't figure out even more was why Zhong Xiuzhu's overconfident behavior could attract the attention of the Dragon King. Dragon King even asked him to personally lead the troops to back up this young general. Furthermore, Dragon King also asked him not to intervene in the battle before the other side completely collapsed. This was to let this guy suffer a big loss, but at the same time, to protect him from death. It seemed that Dragon King intended to put this young general in an important position. Xiao Yan's eyes flashed. He reached out and pressed down on the composite bow raised by a guard beside him. He gently shook his head and said, "Now is not the time for us to enter the game. Let's see what other countermeasures he has." He didn't believe that the general favored by the Dragon King was just an embroidered pillow. After all, Lin Yuan's vision had always been good. As long as someone was personally appointed by him to a certain position, they would be able to do their job with ease. Occasionally, they would even be able to create some unexpected surprises. The personal guard helplessly put down the composite bow in his hand and smiled bitterly. "Big brother, you saw it too. That troop was beaten so badly that they couldn't even raise their heads in the first round. According to the fighting rhythm of the archers, if they can't organize an effective resistance to suppress the enemy's offensive within 5 minutes, they will all be shot into sieve." Xiao Yan's troops were almost all of the Tree Elf tribe's demi-human warriors. As Lin Yuan's most proficient archers, the experience of these Tree Elves told them that the friendly forces at the front had completely collapsed. If they couldn't stop the effective resistance in time and suppress the enemy, then they could only find an opportunity to abandon a portion of their troops and retreat. In that case, it would only be a matter of how much they would lose. But if these guys continued to hide there recklessly, once Shen Linjun's reserves in the jungle attacked them, they would probably be completely wiped out. Thinking of this, the guard helplessly nudged Xiao Yan with his shoulder and said, "Big brother, we are all brothers. Tell me, do you have a grudge against that guy who is leading the troops? As long as you nod, we will find an opportunity to kill him with an arrow. It's better than the friendly forces at the front being completely wiped out." "Pa." Xiao Yan slapped the guard on the back of his head and said fiercely, "Dragon King's order, before the friendly forces at the front are completely defeated, not to intervene in the battle situation." "Do you want me to violate the order?" Speaking of this, Xiao Yan paused, and the light in his eyes flickered. He chuckled and said, "Besides, you also know that this troop still has the opportunity to counterattack and even seize the initiative, which means that they haven't completely collapsed. Before that, you stay here obediently and don't act rashly. Otherwise, if the Dragon King is angry, no one will be able to save our head." The personal guard grimaced and rubbed the back of his head. However, his face was filled with an unconvinced expression. He said in a deep voice, "Then I will see if Big Brother is wrong. However, I will say this first. If I am wrong, I will do whatever Big Brother says in the future. Even if you want me to die, I will not frown. But Big Brother, if you are wrong, you will have to give me a troop and let me lead the troops alone." In his opinion, whether it was stealth or archery, he was better than his big brother. And his big brother's advantage was only that he had joined the Dragon King's service earlier. Towards the Dragon King whom he had never met, he was even more like a loyal dog. He had no doubt that if the Dragon King wanted his big brother to die, his big brother would not even frown. Even the general in front of him, who was beaten to the point of being unable to fight back, had a better future than his big brother in his eyes. After all, the northern frontier was surging like a storm. In such a situation, only wild wolves could have a bright future. And a loyal dog like his big brother, who only knew how to wag its tail and beg for mercy, other than getting some leftovers, would sooner or later be eaten by the wolves. Xiao Yan was silent for a moment. His complicated gaze lingered on the guard for a moment before he nodded gently. He was clear about his younger brother's thoughts, but he was even more clear about the Dragon King's temperament. Obediently following the Dragon King, as long as the Dragon King gave him something and did not fight for what he wanted, he could live for a long time and protect the legacy of his bloodline. As for those who disobeyed the Dragon King, even if they could be put in an important position for a while, in the end, they would only end up in a situation where the cunning rabbit was killed and the lackey cooked. He was different from his younger brother, or it could be said that he was different now. Xiao Yan, who had been captured and enslaved by the humans in the early years, had lost most of his wild nature. Xiao Yan valued the survival of the entire tree elf tribe more than his own future, so he was willing to be a loyal dog. As for his younger brother, although Xiao Yan did not mind letting him roam his own world, he still needed more training. He did not ask for him to become outstanding, but at least he did not want to bring disaster to the entire tribe. On the other side, Zhong Xiuzhu frowned slightly, his face gloomy to the extreme. He was very clear that the enemy's close combat troops were about to approach. If he could not set up an effective firing position, the entire army would be wiped out. Even if he was lucky enough to survive, this defeat would be nailed to the pillar of shame. Not to mention leading an army in the future, even the southern expedition would not tolerate a guy like him who only knew how to talk on paper. I'll say it one last time, prepare to counterattack. Those who disobey will have their entire family wiped out. Zhong Xiuzhu threw away the spear in his hand and rolled away to avoid a cluster of arrows. He then picked up a bow from a corpse. His movements were as quick and violent as a cheetah. He drew his bow and shot 3 arrows in a row. Suddenly, several muffled groans resounded in the jungle. At this moment, Zhong Xiuzhu completely forgot about the demeanor of a scholarly general. He, who did not have any achievements or glory, did not need those superficial things. If he wanted these soldiers to listen to him obediently, he must let them know what fear was, and what the consequences of disobeying orders were. Stop King pretending to be dead. Stand up and counterattack. Otherwise, we will all die here. Yu Dingchen, who was also struggling to resist the rain of arrows, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and picked up a trembling soldier. Then, he swung the sharp blade in his hand and chopped off a big head in an instant. He sneered, "Everyone here knows that I am an Imperial Guard, and you all know that your name and background information have been recorded by us. Do I need to repeat the consequences of disobeying orders?" Chapter 529. Yu Dingchen did not come from a military background, so he was unfamiliar with how to boost morale. He did not know what to do next. However, as the Qianhu of the Imperial Guards, Yu Dingchen's mentality resonated with Zhong Xiuzhu's to a certain extent. Furthermore, he knew that if the situation continued to deteriorate, all of them would die. As such, he immediately cheered himself up and began to supervise Zhong Xiuzhu. There was no need to mention the status of the Imperial Guards and the Demon Emperor's Association in the northern frontier. They were ruthless people who could kill an entire family with a single thought. Furthermore, the more they went against such organizations, the more dirt they would dig out, and the more gruesome their deaths would be. More people would be implicated. Now that Li Zhongxing's favorite student had gone all out and the Imperial Guards were helping him, the ostrich-like soldiers could no longer keep up the act. They began to tremble and began to follow Zhong Xiuzhu's orders to build a defensive line and prepare for a counterattack. Coupled with the experts who came out with Zhong Xiuzhu and the Knight General Frost, who had his wounds treated, they were able to rebuild the defensive line in just a few minutes. The two armies began to shoot at each other, fighting for the initiative. While Shen Lin Jun's reserve troops had excellent shooting skills, the Southern Expedition's troops were well equipped. After seeing that their enemies were either killed or injured by their arrows, the morale of the Southern Expedition's troops was greatly boosted. They were able to suppress the reserve troops of the Southern Expedition in the jungle. After all, fighting was a physical activity, especially in such a life-and-death battle. If one had 10% of their strength, they would not dare to use only 90%. As such, the rhythm of shooting at each other only lasted for about 10 minutes. Even the airborne realm soldiers were sweating profusely and panting as they sat on the ground. They no longer had the strength to draw their bows and nock their arrows. This was the time it took for the Southern Expedition soldiers to take turns to shoot at the enemy. Therefore, at this moment, almost 80% of the soldiers had completely lost their strength. Even if the enemy rushed in front of them, they did not have the ability to stand up and fight. As for the Shunlin Jun reserves in the forest, they had not eaten properly for several days, so they did not have much physical strength left. How could they withstand this level of consumption? In this short 10 minutes, the first 3 minutes were still shooting at each other, but in the next 7 minutes, it was almost like the Southern Expedition was crazily shooting arrows into the forest. There was no sound for a long time. Zhong Xiuzhu was silent for a moment before he silently pulled out the arrow from his shoulder. He called for a medic to treat his wound. Feeling the burning pain in his shoulder, he grimaced and roared, "Brothers, do you see this? You guys aren't any worse than those scum. As long as you dare to fight with them, you will realize that dregs will always be dregs, and we are fierce tigers." All the soldiers looked at Zhong Xiuzhu in a daze. No one cheered, and no one echoed. It wasn't just because they didn't have the strength. It was also because Zhong Xiuzhu's decision was to use the lives of their entire families to threaten them into going to war. After all, only one of them would die in battle, and there would even be pensions for their families. However, once this military order was carried out by the imperial guards, the 3 tribes who feared war would no longer be just empty words. No one would like such a general, even if he led them to a battle that they could not win. No one would think about whether they were wrong, because this was the deep-rooted bad habit of human beings. "Medic, come forward and treat the wounds of our brothers. The rest of you, prepare to eat, then rest and recover your strength. Those who still have strength, come with me to see if there are any wounded soldiers who are still alive. Behead them and let them know the consequences of being our enemy." After the voice fell, Zhong Xiuzhu picked up his long spear again and stepped out of the camp. Although he had long been mentally prepared, he still felt a big difference when he was suddenly treated coldly by his own soldiers. Yu Dingchen sighed softly and quickly caught up with Zhong Xiuzhu. He reached out and patted him on the shoulder, and said in a deep voice, "I remember this saying is from the first lesson of the military academy. Although I am a layman, I don't think you did anything wrong. In that situation, if you gave up on these people and chose to break out, their families would have lost their sons, husbands, and fathers. It would be 100 times worse than now. I believe they will understand you sooner or later." "I know." Zhong Xiuzhu nodded slightly, and his eyes glowed again. He smiled and said, "Thank you for what you did before. If you didn't reveal your identity, they would still have ignored my words." He had long known what it meant to be merciful, not to say that all generals were cruel and bloodthirsty, but a cruel fact that all leaders had to accept. If you didn't have enough strength, background, and reputation to convince your soldiers that as long as they strictly followed your orders, they would be able to obtain the final victory. Then, no matter how well you planned and how well you prepared, as long as the enemy found a flaw in your plan, the morale of your soldiers would drop, and they would become lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Those famous generals who could devise strategies and determine victory from thousands of miles away did indeed exist. However, they had earned their fame through countless battles. As the soul of an army, they only needed to tell their subordinates that victory was inevitable. Even if all the soldiers on the front lines were killed, the soldiers behind them would think that it was a necessary sacrifice before victory. Then, they would continue to charge forward and fight. The situation is settled. The light in Xiao Yan's eyes slowly faded, and his eyes returned to their original state. He smiled at the guard beside him. The guard waved his hand in annoyance, but he didn't say anything unpleasant. He didn't understand how the army that had been beaten by the enemy a moment ago, and didn't even dare to fight back, suddenly became fierce and defeated the enemy in the dense forest. Pa! Pa! Xiao Yan reached out and patted the guard's shoulder. He smiled and said, I will continue to lead people here to clean up the enemy. You lead the cavalry and quickly bypass here. Go to the barracks at the other end of the dense forest and pass down the order. Let them launch a general attack. Be sure to kill all the Frost Mirror cavalry in the camp before sunrise tomorrow. In addition, remember to let them put on Shen Lin Jun's reserve armor for the fallen brothers. He paused, and then slowly said, I know you look down on me, and I'm too lazy to argue with you. I also know you want the opportunity to lead the army alone, and I can give it to you. But I hope you will use your brain more, and think about the consequences before you make a decision. Even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for the people in the tribe, for your father, for your brothers and sisters. Chapter 530. After the battle ended, Zhong Xiuzhu didn't press the attack. Instead, he used the excuse of correcting the troops to reject Mount Frost's request to depart immediately. After the battle, Zhong Xiuzhu calmed down and thought about many things. The most important point was that the troops that were supposed to ambush them didn't show up at all. However, since they were patrolling nearby, they must have realized that there was a battle going on here. Yet, they didn't help. Obviously, they had received some special orders. Based on this, Zhong Xiuzhu quickly realized that Dragon King was watching his every move. Even the casualties of this battle had been sent to the northern frontier through the intelligence agency. Since he had achieved his goal, Zhong Xiuzhu didn't forget what his mission was. So, he stopped. It would take time to completely wipe out Mount Frost's cavalry, and he could only try his best to buy as much time as possible. After letting out a long breath, Zhong Xiuzhu put his hands behind his head. His eyes shone with an obscure light. Yu Dingchen, who had changed into a white Kirin uniform, opened the tent flap and walked to Zhong Xiuzhu's table. He put a bowl of steaming rice on it and said with a smile, They said that you've been staying in your tent since you came back. You haven't even eaten. Now that you're the commander-in-chief, you can't fall here before the mission is completed. Zhong Xiuzhu looked at the big bowl in front of him and squeezed out a stiff smile. He looked up at Yu Dingchen and asked, Actually, I don't understand. As a Qianhu of the Imperial Guards, why did you give up the safety of the rear and willingly stay in the southern expedition as a pawn after delivering the order from the northern frontier king? Because the southern expedition is short of manpower. Yu Dingchen pulled a chair over and casually sat in front of Zhong Xiuzhu. He smiled and said, I'm a layman in the military, but you're also a spy. Do you know what it means to punish a Qianhu? That was the most disliked position in the entire embroidered uniform guard, because once a criminal was caught, I would be in charge of interrogating them. If I couldn't get anything out of them, then all the blame would fall on me. Therefore, in order to ensure that I can keep my clothes and my life, I have to resort to any means. I have to be covered in blood every day. At this point, Yu Dingchen smiled and continued, It's a pity that I managed to get something out of them. The credit belongs to the higher-ups and has nothing to do with me. And the benefits that the families of the prisoners sent over also belong to the Nanjun Discipline Commission and have nothing to do with me. I worked hard and got scolded. In the end, I didn't get anything good. Zhong Xiuzhu didn't reply. Instead, he focused on eating, but his gaze stopped on Yu Dingchen's face. Yu Dingchen stretched and smiled. Right now, there's war everywhere in the north. As long as you can risk losing your head and travel to various battlefields to deliver information, even if you're an unorganized spy of the embroidered uniform guard, you'll be promoted to Qianhu after the war is over. Those Qianhu who were originally on the same level as me can even become commanders and personally lead a guard. They'll become people with real power on the northern frontier. Only I am a Qianhu now, and I'll most likely still be a Qianhu after the war is over. As he said this, a hint of loneliness appeared in Yu Dingchen's eyes. To be able to quickly rise from the grassroots to become a Qianhu in the early days of the embroidered uniform guard, there was naturally no problem with Yu Dingchen's ability. It was just that he had offended some people and was assigned to a Qianhu with few benefits. Unless he handled some major case that alarmed the Dragon King, he would never have a chance to make a name for himself in this life. The entire embroidered uniform guard is in operation, and almost everyone has been sent out. That's why I was able to get this opportunity to go to Donglin City to deliver the decree of the king of the northern frontier. But what can this little merit do? That's why I don't want to go back. I want to stay on the southern expedition and continue to play my role in the following battles. When it's time to award merit, I want to be a commander. At this point, Yu Dingchen rubbed the tip of his nose and said with a smile, I just didn't expect that my first mission after joining the Southern Expedition Army would be to escort supplies with you and encounter such a dangerous situation. That's why I have to thank you. If you hadn't suddenly acted so ruthlessly, all of us would have died here. Then, you can come with me. Zhong Xiuzhu swallowed the last grain of rice and looked at Yu Dingchen with shining eyes, as if he was looking at a rare treasure. Huh! Yu Dingchen raised his eyebrows again and looked at Zhong Xiuzhu with a blank expression. Today, Zhong Xiuzhu really wasn't a big shot in the southern expedition. Without any merit, even if he had Li Zhongxing's favor, he was just a team leader. Whether it was status or experience, he couldn't compare to a Qianhu of the embroidered uniform guard. But now, Zhong Xiuzhu was asking him to follow him with a smile on his face. The king of the northern frontier and Dragon King should know about our every move today. After this battle, whether it's a reward or a punishment, I won't stay on the southern expedition's list anymore. I think the higher-ups will allocate a part of the southern expedition to form a new army for me. I don't know where I'll be assigned to, but I'll most likely replace Marshal Li's current position to build the Great Wall project and guard the border. Since you can't make a name for yourself in the embroidered uniform guard, why don't you transfer to follow me? Zhong Xiuzhu put the bowl back on the table and asked with a serious face. Yu Dingchen's expression changed several times. After a while, he slowly raised his eyelids and smiled bitterly. I think you overestimate me. I told you that I'm a complete layman in the military. If you want to entrust me with important tasks, I'm afraid it won't work. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Zhong Xiuzhu tapped his fingertips on the table and stared at Yu Dingchen. He said in a deep voice, when do you think the embroidered uniform guard and the Association of the Demon Emperor will have a winner? Even if one side doesn't die, at least there should be a male and female side, right? Yu Dingchen's breathing stopped slightly, and his eyes began to flicker. It wasn't a secret that the two major spy agencies in the northern frontier didn't get along, but other than Shedong and Luo Shu, no one dared to mention it openly. At most, they would fight openly and secretly. Therefore, Zhong Xiuzhu's behavior could be described as crazy. If they can't be separated, even if they can be separated by force, the conflict will erupt again. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100 years. Zhong Xiuzhu abruptly stood up from his seat and said with a smile, I've always been bold, so I've decided to be bold again this time. But I need your help, as well as a group of professional spies to carry out this plan for me. Chapter 531. The next day, early in the morning, Zhong Xiuzhu led the supply troops and set off once again. However, the troops that originally had more than 2,000 people had been reduced to less than 1,000 after the previous day's battle. Many of the supplies that had been sent over had been torn apart by arrows or sharp blades, causing their packaging to be scattered. Zhong Xiuzhu and his men had no interest in picking up the dusty grains. After calculating the number of supplies left, they sent a group of sentries into the forest. After receiving a signal confirming that the convoy was safe, Zhong Xiuzhu and his men escorted the convoy into the forest. The forest had been filled with danger yesterday, but it was empty today. I have a bad feeling about this. Qiuzhu's eyes flashed with worry as he rode on his horse. It wasn't that he couldn't understand why Zhong Xiuzhu wanted to rest for a night before setting off. After all, the convoy was already exhausted after the bloody battle. Moreover, in order to deal with Shen Linjun's reserve forces, Zhong Xiuzhu had to abandon his persona and order the soldiers to fight. If he continued to ignore the soldiers' opinions and continued to transport the supplies, it was very likely that a mutiny would occur. Therefore, even the Frost Mirror cavalry didn't urge Zhong Xiuzhu to set off. Although they weren't so tired that they didn't want to move, they were still exhausted. If there was a mutiny, They wouldn't even be able to run out of the simple fortifications. But for the entire night, Qiu Fen had felt uneasy, as if something big had happened. This uneasy feeling only turned into fear and confusion when Qiu Zhuo and his men arrived at the original encampment of the Frost Mirror Cavalry. This was because the place was already in a mess. There were mutilated corpses everywhere. Most of them were the corpses of the Shuangjian dynasty's cavalrymen and horses. The rest of the corpses weren't wearing any armor, just like the enemies they encountered in the forest. Moreover, the wounds on the corpses were clearly caused by the Shuangjian dynasty's scimitars. Qiu Tan couldn't think of anyone other than Shun Lin Jun, who was as famous as Shueliao cavalryman, who didn't wear an inch of armor and directly collided with the scimitars and hooves of the Frost Mirror cavalryman. Moreover, he was able to achieve such a tragic result on both sides. Because they had never fought against the army of the northern frontier head-on, the only close contact they had was yesterday. He had witnessed with his own eyes how his team of over 2,000 was suppressed by the enemy's counterattack and couldn't even raise their heads in the fortification. From that moment on, the Northern Frontier Army had nothing to do with elites in Qiu Ming's eyes. They were just a bunch of cowards with nothing but strength. Cowards didn't have the guts to charge into the Frost Mirror cavalry formation in such a state. Zhong Xiuzhu's eyes narrowed slightly. His voice was somewhat bitter as he said, "It seems that those fellows we met yesterday were not simply coveting the supplies we were escorting. Their initial goal was to block our path." But Qiu Teng's voice was choked with emotion. Why? Although they hadn't counted all the corpses in the camp, a rough estimate put the total number of corpses on both sides at around 200,000 to 300,000. If they counted the men and horses that had died at the hands of the Northern Frontier Army and the warriors that had been devoured by the demon beasts in the forest, even if there were still survivors, there would only be a few tens of thousands of them left. The number of tens of thousands was just wishful thinking on his part. It was obviously unrealistic to expect the Shuangjian dynasty to pay a huge price for an army that had been crippled or even destroyed. Yesterday, Qiu Tan was still contemplating whether he should stand on the side of the Shueliao tribe or maintain his position and stand on the side of the allied army formed by the other tribes. However, the scene in front of him mercilessly slapped him in the face. Now, he had no choice. The Shuangjian dynasty has a strong military force. 500,000 cavalrymen won't be a serious injury to your dynasty, but the number of casualties will be divided among the tribes, which is still an unacceptable loss. Moreover, I can be sure that the cavalrymen that entered the Northern Frontier Army were definitely the nobles of the Shuangjian dynasty. After all, in your opinion, compared to your old enemy, the Shunwu dynasty, even if our newly risen Northern Frontier Army has unlimited potential in the future, it is just a soft persimmon that is easy to pinch and eat. Therefore, as long as they have the slightest bit of connections, they will join the troops that plunder the Northern Frontier Army instead of running to the Central Plains to deal with the unpredictable Shunwu dynasty. Yu Dingchen didn't hide his words at all. His bloody tone revealed a bit of disdain as he said coldly, "I can see that the Shunwu dynasty army naturally won't turn a blind eye to this. Young chieftain, do you think that the tribes of your dynasty will just let the deaths of 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian in the Northern Frontier Army be? But we have already planned to negotiate for peace. There is no need. Even if the leaders of those tribes are dissatisfied, they will give face to the Great Khan and won't start a war with the Northern Frontier Army." Qiu Zhuo seemed to find it hard to accept this fact. He shook his head bitterly and his voice was choked with sobs. Yu Dingchen sneered and added, "It is because there is no need that they deliberately did this. Shun Lin Jun's reserve troops have been defeated by us. Unless the Shunwu dynasty has the ability to settle the trouble between the Qingjiang dynasty and you in an instant and send troops to the Northern Frontier Army, it will be possible to bring these reserve troops back to the Central Plains. However, everyone, including themselves, knows that this is impossible, so..." Yu Dingchen's hesitant look successfully evoked Qiu Zhuo's imagination. This was because he couldn't explain this matter too directly. Otherwise, Qiu Zhuo would think that the Northern Frontier Army was trying to frame the Shunwu dynasty. However, he couldn't directly say it, but Yu Dingchen could lead Qiu Zhuo's thoughts in that direction through hints. These Shun Lin Jun's reserve troops didn't believe that they had a way to survive. Therefore, The moment they lost Wei River City, they had already become the undead of the Shunwu dynasty. Although they weren't as miserable as the remnants of the Zhu clan in name, they were actually worse off. At least the remnants of the Zhu clan could still struggle on the line between life and death, but they didn't have the slightest bit of hope. Therefore, under such circumstances, they would do something even crazier than the remnants of the Zhu clan. For example, they would drag the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalry down with them. Kuzhua was right. If both sides insisted on negotiating for peace, then this kind of action would be meaningless. However, the Frost Mirror Khan was already old and frail, and no longer had the heroic spirit he once had. Although he sat firmly on the throne of the Great Khan, everyone could see that the other tribes on the grasslands were eyeing the Bloodsil tribe covetously. Once that lion died, the entire Bloodsil tribe would be eaten up. Chapter 532. Under such circumstances, how much power did the so-called Frost Mirror Khan have to say anything? 500,000 nobles from the Shuangjin dynasty had died at the northern frontier. If most of the tribes were clamoring for war with the northern frontier, the Frost Mirror Khan would have no choice but to fight against Lin Yuan even if he didn't want to. Therefore, it was reasonable for the reserves of Shun Lin Jun to attack the Frost Mirror cavalry. As people who were doomed to die, trading one life for one life with the northern frontier was undoubtedly the best choice for them, even though the Shun Lin Jun reserves weren't the ones who did this. Even though Zhong Xiuzhu and Yu Dingchen were both under the watch of Qu Yang and the others. However, at this critical juncture of the war, the cooperation between the Genie Guards and the Shifter Emperor was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. Therefore, they were very clear about what had happened here last night and who had died here. The Shun Lin Jun reserves that had been hiding in the forest last night were just a group of defeated soldiers who had accidentally wandered here. They were a very helpful chess piece to Lin Yuan's plan. However, Zhong Xiuzhu's determination to fight almost ruined Lin Yuan's plan. After all, if Zhong Xiuzhu really won, the supply troops would have no excuse to delay and would have no choice but to march forward. When the two sides met, the Frost Mirror cavalry would be full of energy after a full meal. They wouldn't even need to wait for the northern frontier to negotiate with the Shuangjin dynasty. They would be able to follow the route the supply troops took and meet up with the main force. Although the Shuangjin dynasty wouldn't have the guts to pay the northern frontier a little less ransom, if that happened, Lin Yuan's plan would fall apart. After all, a wolf that hadn't been beaten would still be eyeing the northern frontier covetously. The tribes that hadn't suffered a loss wouldn't ignore the Great Khan's order to make up for their losses. They wouldn't let their men rush into the central plains and the south of the Shunwu dynasty to plunder. Fortunately, Zhong Xiuzhu had overestimated himself. He had also overestimated this group of elites who had been honed on the battlefield. Zhong Xiuzhu had the advantage of striking only after the enemy had made the first move. Although he had barely defeated the enemy's greed for the supply troops, he had also lost the ability to continue marching. Because Qu Teng had personally experienced that battle, he knew that the performance during the battle was not something that could be achieved by putting on a show. Although the enemy in the forest did not reveal their identity, they had jumped straight to the point that they were werewolves. This was because in the north, there was only one army that dared to intercept the supply troops of the northern frontier and had sufficient combat power. The Frost Mirror cavalry that were restricted by the terrain could only defend the plains. They did not dare to enter the forest to fight. Therefore, a great path of survival was right beside them. They did not have the courage to explore it. They could only hide in the camp and wait for a slow death. Therefore, at this point in the show, as long as the defeated army was not captured alive by Qu Teng and his men, the Shun Lin Jun reserves would be like yellow mud falling into their pants. Even if it wasn't Sh*T, it would still Sh*T. There was no need for Yu Dingchen and Zhong Xiuzhu to guide them. No matter what happened next, Qu Teng would lock the identity of the enemy as the Shun Lin Jun reserves. This was why the current scene was happening. At this moment, Qu Teng, who had been forced into a dead end, had a gloomy expression on his face. He directly placed his hatred on the Shun Lin Jun reserves. This was not because Zhong Xiuzhu's plan was good. It was because the enemy had given him a godly assist. It was as if the heavens were helping him. As for the survivors, that was even more impossible, because the Shunlin-jun reserves in the forest were not withdrawn at all. Last night, Xiao Yan and his tree elf guards sneaked into the camp and slit their throats with short knives. Not to mention leaving behind corpses, they even cleaned up the bloodstains. After all, they were fighting in the forest at night. Even if the regular army of the Divine Forest Army came back, they wouldn't be able to compete with these demi-human warriors. This was especially true for the agile tree elves who were good at stealth and assassination. Because of Xiao Yan's outstanding performance, in the eyes of Qiu Teng and the others, Zhong Xiuzhu had made a wrong inference from the beginning. The defeated Shunlin-jun reserves did not come for the military supplies at all. Their purpose was to occupy the forest and block the military supplies to buy time for their comrades who were fighting with the Frost Mirror Cavalry. After the mission was over, these Shunlin-jun reserves did not even collect the corpses and hurriedly retreated, leaving behind a mess on the ground. Qiu Ting swallowed his saliva and gasped for breath. 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry. Even if they are not completely destroyed, the remaining ones are all defeated soldiers who have been scared out of their wits. So I think they don't know that we paid a high price to redeem them. What about you guys? After he finished speaking, the rest of the Frost Mirror Cavalry looked at each other and did not know what to say. As an envoy personally appointed by the Shuangjian dynasty, Qiu Teng naturally stood on the side of the Shueliao tribe. However, these Frost Mirror Cavalry were originally the warriors of their own tribes. They came out specifically to see how the warriors of their own tribes were doing. But when they arrived at their destination, they suddenly realized that the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry had all turned into cold corpses. For a moment, their faces flushed red, and they stuttered, not knowing what to say. After all, Qiu Ting had two choices, but they only had one choice. Now that they were all dead, they did not even know what to say when they returned. However, they had to admit that the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry was indeed not worth the price. Instead of spending a large amount of money to buy back a batch of incomplete corpses, it was better to save the 13th prince of the Shueliao tribe. That way, the Shueliao tribe would more or less compensate them. Stop hesitating. The veins on Qiu Teng's forehead throbbed as he said fiercely, Shunlin-jun will not let go of any opportunity. If the 13th prince is killed by those bastards while you are hesitating, there is no need for us to go back. Let's just kill ourselves here. We don't want to drag the tribe down with us. I agree to take the 13th prince back. Seconded. Me too. After being yelled at by Qiu Teng, the Frost Mirror Cavalry realized that they had no other choice. Although they really did not want the 13th prince, who was known as the #1 warrior of the Shueliao tribe, to return to the Shueliao tribe, they made the wise choice to save their own lives. After all, the 13th prince might not join forces with the 3rd prince after he returned. One of them was a scholar, while the other was a warrior. A ferocious wolf and a cunning fox would never walk side by side. When that time came, it would be time for their tribe to fight for the throne. Chapter 533. 10 minutes later. Shunning City, Northern Frontier Prince's Mansion. Li Zhong was flipping through a piece of paper that didn't have many words written on it. He gritted his teeth and felt a buzzing sound in his head. Because of the two outstanding Secret Service organizations, the Embroidered Uniform Guards and the Association of the Demon Emperor, although the flames of war had ignited in the entire Northern Territory, it didn't affect the efficiency of receiving intelligence from the rear at all. From the moment Zhong Xiuzhu wanted to arm wrestle with Shunlin-jun's reserve, every move on the field didn't escape Li Zhong's eyes. But intelligence was intelligence. The letter in Li Zhong's hand was personally delivered by Zhong Xiuzhu. The content was very simple and very bold. Because Zhong Xiuzhu wanted to establish the 3rd Secret Service organization in the Northern Frontier, the Military Intelligence Division, whose full name was the Military Intelligence Analysis Division. The Embroidered Uniform Guards had a very special position in the Northern Frontier. Because other than Luo Shu, all the members of the Embroidered Uniform Guards were from the Association of the Demon Emperor. They were a secret service organization that was trained by Lin Yuan himself. Since they officially left the Association of the Demon Emperor, They carried the halo of personally appointed by the Dragon King. So in the eyes of the local government, they were an existence that had to be opened wide. Even the lowest level of embroidered uniform guard's Secret Service agent had to be respectful to the local government. Because disrespecting them was equivalent to disrespecting the Dragon King. But not everyone would give face to the embroidered uniform guards. For example, some of the Demon Emperor's Guild with similar authority didn't like the embroidered uniform guards. After all, the members of the embroidered uniform guards were all from the association of the Demon Emperor. Many of the Baihu and Qianhu who had real power in the association of the Demon Emperor were at the same level as the younger brothers. They had to smile and call everyone Big Brother when they saw them. With the sudden rise of the embroidered uniform guards, these younger brothers also became important figures in the northern frontier. This made the Demon Emperor's Guild feel like their rice bowl was stolen. This was the reason why the two sides didn't deal with each other from the beginning. Furthermore, the stronger the embroidered uniform guards were, the weaker the Shifter Emperor's Assembly's method of obtaining information would be. In the later stages, the Shifter Emperor's Assembly would no longer have anything to do with the Shifter Emperor's Assembly. Therefore, whether it was for power or profit, the association of Shifter Emperors and the embroidered uniform guards were like fire and water. The embroidered uniform guards had a halo, but so did the Shifter Emperors Association. After all, it was a faction personally supported by Lin Yuan. The Shifter Emperors Association had quite a bit of influence in the entire northern frontier. Even the local tyrants in the grey areas had to depend on the Shifter Emperors Association if they wanted to earn some money. It wasn't difficult for the local government to do something well, but to do it efficiently, they had to use the influence of these local tyrants. After all, in the special appointment system of officials in the northern frontier, there had always been flowing officials and officials made of iron. These officials with salaries and ranks were far inferior to the local government. If they weren't the local tyrants, they were the local tyrants' protection. Most of the time, they had more influence in the local government than their official counterparts. This was because they represented the Shifter Emperors Association. This was an unavoidable situation. After all, the term of an official wasn't long. It was obviously unrealistic to expect a new group of officials to govern the local government in an orderly manner from scratch. They could only rely on the officials to wisely manage their relationships with the local officials. Only by cooperating with both sides could the local government unleash the greatest power of the local government. Therefore, the Shifter Emperors Association, which wasn't considered an official faction, had the right to speak in the local government. This was why they had the confidence to compete with the embroidered uniform guards to see who was the leader of the Northern Frontier Special Forces. In name, the embroidered uniform guards could trample on the Shifter Emperors Association. However, if the two sides completely fell out, the Shifter Emperors Association could instantly shut down most of the embroidered uniform guards' offices in the northern frontier. However, the embroidered uniform guards and the northern frontier's royal residents would have to settle the bloody accounts afterwards. However, whether it was the embroidered uniform guards or the Shifter Emperors Association, they obviously had nothing to do with the military system. Although according to the rules, the embroidered uniform guards could fill in the positions of the military officers. However, at the level of the embroidered uniform guards, they could easily get rich. If there were vacancies in the positions of the military officers who hadn't reached a certain level, the embroidered uniform guards wouldn't easily use their privileges. After all, Yu Dingchen was an exception. After all, being given priority to fill in the positions and having to fill in the positions were two different things. The privileges of the embroidered uniform guards only allowed them to compare with officers from ordinary backgrounds when they were promoted. If both of them had similar abilities and could adapt to the position, the embroidered uniform guards could directly take up the position. However, if they used their privileges, it would be equivalent to leaving the embroidered uniform guards. If they still continued to be associated with the embroidered uniform guards, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong wouldn't let them off easily. It would also temporarily cut off the chance for the embroidered uniform guards to gradually control the entire military officer system. Of course, although the two spy agencies weren't related to the military system, the military still had to accept the supervision of these two agencies when they didn't have their own spy forces. Furthermore, because they weren't on the same side, no one would be nice to the military officers. Therefore, the military had always hoped to form their own spy forces. However, other than Zhang Xiuzhu, who wasn't well known in the northern frontier, no military officer dared to suggest that the military establish their own intelligence agency because it was a taboo. After all, the military was the strongest force of a force. If such a department was allowed to supervise itself, it would only allow the military officers' power to expand infinitely. Sooner or later, there would be rebellions and rebellions. In addition, Luo Shu and Shedong were already badly beaten for power. The cake that they had now was not enough to eat. How could they allow a third spy agency to rise and take over the military system that they coveted but couldn't get their hands on? If such a thing really happened, Luo Shu and Shedong's first reaction would definitely not be to ignore the growth of this hidden danger. These two spy chiefs would immediately join hands to strangle the third party that was a threat to them in the cradle. They wouldn't leave a single chance. However, a triangle was always the most stable shape. Once the military intelligence agency was established, it would undoubtedly be the most suitable for Lin Yuan's main theme of checks and balances. Moreover, it would also free up a lot of manpower, so that the entire northern frontier wouldn't feel stretched for information transmission. Looking at the current embroidered uniform guards, because of this war, the only people who didn't have a mission in the whole shunning city were the typical scapegoats. The rest of the members were all running around day and night in the northern battlefield, trying to avoid contact with the enemy as much as possible. The previous Qianhu, Yu Dingchen, was from such a background. Except for these guys that even the embroidered uniform guards themselves didn't like, Li Zhong had to make an appointment in advance if he wanted to call two embroidered uniform guards to do something. Although it seemed that he knew the situation of the war like the back of his hand, only Li Zhong himself knew the pain. Without the supervision of the Association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guards, the originally peaceful northern frontier was now a mess. If Lin Yuan and Boss Lin weren't in Shunning City, perhaps even the northern frontier would be in chaos. Chapter 534. It's a good idea, but it's a pity that it's too ambitious. Lin Yuan, who already knew the contents of the letter, sighed faintly and smiled. Actually, according to the original rhythm, Luo Shu and Shedong would definitely have a big battle. At that time, even a big shot like you wouldn't be able to avoid it, let alone other forces. The army wants to establish their own spy agency, not to seize power, but more to protect themselves. If it wasn't for this sudden war, Luo Shu and Shedong would already be like fire and water. Almost every day, there would be members of the other party's faction who would fall from grace. However, every crime was irrefutable, causing those who hadn't yet chosen a side to be in a state of panic. According to this rhythm, when the chess pieces in the hands of the big shots on both sides were used up, they would use the evidence in their hands to force the neutral party to choose a side. However, speaking of which, they were all top spy agencies in the northern frontier. How could the embroidered uniform guard not have what the Shifter Emperor Association had? The operation of choosing a side before being imprisoned was a common occurrence in the northern frontier. Actually, I think that Zhang Xiuzhu's idea is not bad. After all, the war has used too much power from the Shifter Emperor Association and the embroidered uniform guard. Now, we have even lost control of our own base. If it wasn't for Zhang Xiu's old subordinates supporting us, I don't know how many forces would have taken this opportunity to meddle in the northern frontier. However, if this continues, the situation will still go out of control. Therefore, I think that instead of letting the Shifter Emperor Association and the embroidered uniform guard continue to fight like this, it would be better to cultivate a third party. Firstly, it would free up some of the spy forces to return to the northern frontier. Secondly, it would also tell Luo Shu and Shedong that they can fight, but if they go overboard, the one who laughs in the end might not necessarily be one of them. However, Zhang Xiuzhu may have the ability, but his temperament is too bad. Now, he wants to prove himself too much and has even forgotten what it means to be unworthy of a position. If the Dragon King doesn't punish him, he will cause great trouble sooner or later. Li Zhong rubbed his chin and said solemnly, "Therefore, I believe that even if we want to nurture a third party, this power should not fall into the hands of Zhong Xiuzhu. According to what Lin Yuan had said in his previous life, Li Zhong should be a Virgo. He strives for perfection in everything and cannot tolerate the slightest flaw. Li Zhong had planned the battle plan against the entire Shuangjin dynasty a long time ago, and it had been carried out smoothly until the appearance of Zhong Xiuzhu. Although the results did not affect the plan at all, and even achieved a better result, Li Zhong could only say that it was due to luck. It could not be repeated again. If Zhong Xiuzhu's sudden change continued to happen, Li Zhong would be suspicious of all his plans. If Li Zhong had been the one to monopolize the power of this kind of unstable element, he would have definitely killed him. However, he did not have the final say in the northern frontier. He could only put forward his own opinions and wait for Lin Yuan's decision. "I'm very curious. What makes you think that the military system does not have its own spy agency?" Lin Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly as he said coldly, "No matter when, the military is this king's most powerful fist to the outside world. The weapons in their hands will never be pointed at their own people. What *T military intelligence department, there is no need for it to exist. In the end, the original intention of this force was to deal with their own people. Zhong Xiuzhu also saw that you wanted a third party to appear, and that I would not make a move against him before I squeezed out all his value. He grasped this mentality and wanted to become an influential official in the northern frontier. Yes, the Dragon King is wise." Li Zhong trembled as he lowered his head, his face full of resentment. Zhong Xiuzhu's ambition was indeed a little inflated. To put it nicely, he was arrogant because of his talent. It was as if the northern frontier could not move without him. Therefore, no matter who it was, he could make changes at the last minute. All of his actions were to make himself famous and then become an influential figure in the northern frontier. He could even stand shoulder to shoulder with first-rate existences like Li Zhongxing, Zhong Qilin, and Jiao Buzhen. However, his little calculations naturally could not escape the eyes of Lin Yuan and Li Zhong. After all, he was a student who had just graduated not long ago. No matter how intelligent he was only an armchair strategist. Compared to existences like Li Zhong and Lin Yuan who had experienced great storms and waves, he was not just a little bit different. However, on this matter, Zhong Xiuzhu grasped Li Zhong's mentality perfectly. Because Li Zhong really did want to set up a third-party spy organization to check and balance Shidong and Luo Shu, he would also have the intention to kill Zhong Xiuzhu, this ambitious existence. Whether it was Li Zhongxing who admired him or Lin Yuan who made the best use of him, neither of them would watch Li Zhong extinguish this future general. This feeling of being calculated inexplicably made Li Zhong feel annoyed. After a while, he suddenly raised his head and stared at Lin Yuan with his eyes wide open. The military system had its own spy organization. Why did he, the king of the northern frontier, not know about it at all? Do you want to ask why there is a third spy organization in the northern frontier? Why did no one, including you, know about it? Lin Yuan grinned and said, "Luo Shu knows. Don't look at how fiercely he and Shidong fight. Unlike Shidong, any of his actions have no disadvantages for the northern frontier. This is because he knows very well that fighting to the death with Shidong will not bring him any benefits. The crazier Shidong's actions are, the more stable the position of the embroidered uniform guard will be. After all, the first batch of members of the embroidered uniform guard and the third spy organization were personally trained by this king, so they can be considered students of the same generation. The embroidered uniform guard was an organization that Lin Yuan had created by imitating the Great Ming Empire's embroidered uniform guard in his previous life. Everyone knew of the embroidered uniform guard's fame, but they did not know that the Great Ming Empire had another force set up outside Liaodong Pass that made countless Mongolian tribes tremble in fear, Yi Bushu. This external scouting force was similar to the scouts that Lin Yuan knew of in his previous life. The requirements were very simple but also very difficult. Those who could go deep into the camp and scout could join Yi Bushu's team. It was said that at Yi Bushu's peak, they could even clearly investigate who the Mongolian Khans met in the camp and what they said. Then, the next day, A document would be sent to the emperor's desk. This special force that had outstanding military achievements in history but few people knew about was set up at the same time as the Embroidered Uniform Guard. Yi Bushu was not a member of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. Although they were not as famous as the former, Yi Bushu was not any worse than the Embroidered Uniform Guard at its peak. Since Lin Yuan had set up the Embroidered Uniform Guard, how could he forget about Yi Bushu? So from the beginning, Lin Yuan did not mind Shedong fighting with Luo Shu. Because in this kind of situation, a person's ambition would be completely exposed. And with Yi Bushu's existence, the two sides would never reach the point of fighting to the death. Chapter 535. Yi Bailin, what do you think of Zhong Xiuzhu? Lin Yuan suddenly opened his mouth and said something that made Li Zhong puzzled. Li Zhong's cultivation method was called Heaven's Sun Gazing at Aura, which was personally taught to him by Lin Yuan. The biggest difference with most of the cultivation methods in the world was that the limit of this cultivation method was not the void realm, but the cultivation conditions were more special. To cultivate this technique, one must have their own territory. Furthermore, one's cultivation base was tied to the prosperity of the territory. Li Zhong had no doubt that if the northern region became the only empire that unified the seven empires, and he was able to govern the entire northern region in an orderly manner, then the cultivation base that the territory would give him would directly push him to a magical realm that he could not even imagine. However, the cultivator of this cultivation method could not be extraordinary, because all his cultivation was fake. For example, if the northern frontier unified the seven dynasties, but all the creatures under his rule died, his cultivation would instantly fall to the level of an ordinary person. Even if there was a natural disaster or man-made disaster somewhere, he would be seriously injured and his cultivation would fall. Now the northern frontier had taken over the whole northern territory, and Li Zhong's cultivation had broken through the threshold of the Heavengang realm. Although he had not fought with others, but based on the feeling that the strong people in the northern frontier brought to him, all the cultivators who were weaker than Winesword Mystery could not bring any threat to him. After all, Winesword Mystery was at the peak of the Heavengang realm, and he had killed the existence of the late stage of Heavengang realm. In addition to the particularity of this cultivation method, Li Zhong's perception of the environment was extremely sharp. Even Luo Shu and Shedong, who were the heads of the secret service who specialized in the cultivation method given by Lin Yuan, could not hide under his eyes. At present, the only one who could do this was the abandoned disciple of the Voidwalker, Xia Siyu. With the talent of shadow affinity, he could blend into the shadow at any time to avoid Li Zhong's perception. He is a good seedling. All of a sudden, an unfamiliar voice sounded. Immediately, a sloppy man wearing black leather armor with long hair like withered grass that covered half of his face slowly appeared in front of Li Zhong. He bowed to Lin Yuan and continued, "Such a person should not have gone to the military academy of the northern frontier in the first place. It would have been better if he had come to my knight's acceptance for training. Then you can take him away." Lin Yuan glanced at the sloppy man and sneered. Since he wants to control the spy system of the army, this king will give him the chance. As for whether he has the ability or not, that is between you and him. Unremitting Night had been stationed on the Frost Mirror Plains ever since it was established. Their greatest enemy had never been the Northern rebels, and they didn't even have to do anything when the situation in the north changed. Their eyes had always been fixed on the Frost Mirror dynasty, and even the Great Wall project had been conceived by Yi Bailin, the current division chief of Unremitting Night. Once the Great Wall was completed, Night would set up more outposts on the Frost Plain and train their own cavalry. Bit by bit, they would infiltrate the Shuangjian dynasty's military system and become Lin Yuan's poisonous fangs embedded in the Shuangjian dynasty, just like their predecessors in the other world had done to the Mongols. This kind of spy agency that was responsible for direct combat was the cruelest. If one wanted to become the leader of the entire wolf pack, he had to challenge his superiors again and again regardless of life and death. Only the strongest wolf could lead the entire tribe to hunt the strongest prey. The moment Zhong Xiuzhu showed his ambition to Knight's acceptance, Yi Bailin and Zhong Xiuzhu would fight to the death. Of course, before that, he had to grow from a wolf cub to a wolf cub and then to an adult wolf with his own codename. Only then would he be qualified to challenge Yi Bailin. Yi Bailin nodded and stepped back, disappearing from Li Zhong's sight again. Deploy well. The Shunwu dynasty is coming. Remember, we can't lose this war. Neither I nor the northern frontier can afford to lose. Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong and calmly instructed before leaving the room. Li Zhong shrugged his shoulders helplessly. When it was rumored that Lin Yuan was the reincarnation of the ancient demon emperor, Li Zhong didn't believe it. After all, no one would believe that an organization that they had never heard of would appear out of nowhere. However, the attitude of the top forces towards Lin Yuan and the treasures that Lin Yuan could easily take out and throw on the market made Li Zhong believe in this point. Therefore, no matter what special techniques Lin Yuan's trump cards practiced, Li Zhong wouldn't feel the slightest bit strange. It would only make Li Zhong feel that Lin Yuan was becoming more and more unfathomable. Due to the war treasury's mechanism of randomly refreshing items, not only did Lin Yuan obtain the method to cultivate demonic power, but there were also many techniques suitable for humans and even mountain-shaking apes. Lin Yuan had exchanged for all of them. Li Zhong's Son of Heaven gazing technique had come from the war treasury. Although the sales of Phase had gradually decreased due to the saturation of the market, the low-grade techniques that Lin Yuan took out were not only the Northern Frontier Academy's entry-level manuals, but they were also treasures that the major forces didn't hesitate to spend a lot of money to obtain. The most outrageous thing was that Lin Yuan didn't have the slightest intention of only selling the techniques to one party. Every low-grade technique that he didn't like would be made into countless copies and sold to various places. It didn't matter if someone had bought the technique before. In order to learn it or to maintain the exclusivity, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce would rush forward and buy all the techniques that they felt were useful. Before meeting Lin Yuan, Li Zhong had never thought that simply printing and selling books could actually become a more profitable business than selling Phase. However, it was also because of the exchange of various cultivation methods that Lin Yuan squandered a lot of war points that he had accumulated. Therefore, he really wanted to win by hook or by crook in the face of this war, which was quite terrifying in terms of rewards and punishments. Because he simply couldn't afford to lose. With 0 war points, if he wanted to pay that terrifying punishment, he would probably be sucked dry in an instant. After leaving Li Zhong's range of perception, Lin Yuan swung his dragon tail and crushed a lump of black mud. He controlled his demonic power to sweep away the black mud one by one. Then, he lifted the letter full of code words and glanced at the contents. Suddenly, a trace of horror flashed past his eyes. 3 days ago, the Jade Lake Immortal Palace's palace master personally left for the Shuangjian dynasty. Her purpose was to meet the great Khan of the Shuangjian dynasty. A simple sentence, but it contained an incomparably terrifying amount of information. If dragons had sweat glands, Lin Yuan would probably be covered in cold sweat at this moment. Chapter 536. Who in the world wanted immortality the most? Without a doubt, it had to be the Emperor. Enjoying the supreme power and the melting of the human world, no matter how heroic these emperors were when they were young, they were still afraid of death when they were old. They were afraid that death would take everything away from them. Even the first emperor who had conquered the world from the weak Qin dynasty to the strong Qin dynasty was no exception. He wantonly searched for necromancers and even spent a lot of money to send Xu Fu out to sea to find the elixir of immortality for him. Unfortunately, he could not escape the erosion of time and the great Qin dynasty died for the second time. Compared to the illusory legends in the previous life, the elixir of immortality on the Tianwu continent had appeared. After a period of accumulation, it had gained some fame and attracted many cultivators who were nearing the end of their lifespan to the Jade Lake Palace in the south of the Shunwu dynasty to take the elixir of immortality. Although everyone knew that those who took the elixir of immortality did not voluntarily become the Jade Lake Palace's consecrators, few could resist the temptation of immortality and threw themselves into the arms of the Jade Lake Palace. Now, the Jade Lake Celestial Palace had accepted more than 100,000 tributes, and their cultivations were generally not low. Even the Shunwu dynasty at its peak would be afraid of such a force. However, Lei Qiusheng changed his previous domineering style and didn't do anything, as if the Jade Lake Celestial Palace didn't pose any threat to him. Some people guessed that the master behind the Jade Lake Palace was Lei Qiusheng. Some people guessed that Lei Qiusheng also wanted the elixir of immortality. But no matter what, the master of the Jade Lake Palace was already a powerful existence standing at the top of the Shunwu dynasty. If he wanted to meet the great Khan of the Shuangjin dynasty in the north, it would not be a small matter. When the great Khan was young, he was a terrifying existence that suppressed the Wanjin dynasty in the south and the Windsource dynasty in the north. If Mirrorfrost was a combination of wolf and dog, then this great Khan was a lion from head to toe, and a very aggressive one at that. Under his leadership, even a puppy would quickly grow into a ferocious wolf. No matter how heavily wounded it would not hide with its tail between its legs to lick its wounds. Instead, it would continue to fight its opponent to the death until the victor was decided. After devouring its opponent's corpse, it would become even stronger and more terrifying, and then seek out its next opponent. When the great Khan was young, the so-called famous generals Yang Xingqi, Lei Qiusheng, and even the Marshal Saint Qi of the Windsource were all no match for him. Even when both sides joined forces, they were still defeated by the great Khan. Could it be? The shock in Lin Yuan's eyes intensified. He knew very well what the elixir of immortality was. It could indeed give people immortality, but that was when they were separated from their physical bodies. Even their original memories would be blurred. Before their cultivation reached a certain level, they would only listen to the orders of a higher-level sky demon. They could not even be considered as sky demons. After all, sky demons still had their own thoughts. These inferior races were no different from dogs in the eyes of a sky demon. However, not many people knew about this. What they valued most was immortality. After all, in the Tianwu continent that had lost the top inheritances, except for the top forces, most cultivators only pursued immortality. Cultivators like Ink Abyss who pursued the Great Tao were too few. A shortcut had appeared in front of them. Who knew how many people with weak minds would want to try it? Although the Great Khan had once pursued the Great Tao, he was now old and could reach the end of his lifespan at any moment. If he was only a cultivator, he would definitely resist the so-called elixir of immortality. However, he still had the identity of the Great Khan. At the same time, he also knew that once he died, the entire Bloodbath tribe would be nibbled away by others. His bloodline and clansmen would become slaves of others. Even if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance, the Great Khan would not be willing to die. If he did not want to die, he would have to accept the elixir of immortality and turn into a sky demon. Lei Qiusheng, who was already in cahoots with the sky demon, and Frost Mirror Khan, who obeyed the sky demon's every word, how could the northern frontier resist the joint attack of the two empires? Damn it! What are these top forces doing? Lin Yuan cursed angrily. Ding Zai had said before that they did not care about the dispute between the Shunwu dynasty and the northern frontier, but the Sky Demon's rebellion could only occur within the Shunwu dynasty. Once the northern frontier was destroyed, they would immediately intervene and wipe out the Sky Demon's troops and Lei Qiusheng. Furthermore, the Sky Demon, who had left the Shunwu dynasty's territory, would also be their target. But even if they did not care, this was such a big matter. Could it be that no one had come to give him a heads up? Did they trust his intelligence agency, or were they held back by other matters? Ever since he knew what the system was hiding in his body and what kind of enemies he had to face were, Lin Yuan did not dare to believe in the so-called luck anymore. He had to prepare for the worst. Even with the promise of the top forces, Lin Yuan did not dare to bet on whether the palace master of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace could reach the Shuangjin dynasty safely. Because the top forces only valued Lin Yuan's potential, they thought that Lin Yuan was qualified to stand side by side with them in the future, so they showed goodwill to Lin Yuan. However, this did not mean that Lin Yuan now had the ability to challenge the top forces. In a situation where the two sides were not equal in strength, promises were powerless and laughable. Even if they did not carry out the promise, they could just casually find an excuse to brush off Lin Yuan. Would Lin Yuan fall out with them? No, I can't just sit here and wait for death. A cold light flashed in his multicolored eyes. Lin Yuan gritted his teeth and soared into the sky, rushing toward the south. Ding! Congratulations to the host for triggering a mission, Life and Death. The Sky Demon's minions have launched an attack. With the power of the northern frontier alone, you are like a small boat in the sea. So, will you choose to guard the northern frontier and wait for the crisis to come, or will you take the initiative to attack and eliminate the crisis? Ding! Detected that the host has made a choice. The mission content has been changed. Please quickly find the Palace Master of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace and destroy her and her minions. Mission reward, 1 premium lucky draw ticket, failure punishment, face the joint attack of the Shunwu and Shuangjian dynasties. Countdown to failure, 3 days and 14 hours, the long-awaited mission window once again appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. Lin Yuan, who had been hiding in the northern frontier for several months, had to give up on suppressing the hidden dangers in the northern frontier. He had to show his strength again and fight. Chapter 537. Ever since he had broken through to the Mountain Lord realm, Lin Yuan no longer had any interest in personally killing his enemies to obtain attribute points. This was because every level up in this realm required an incomparably large amount of attribute points. It was so large that Lin Yuan did not even know the exact number of attribute points. If he wanted to obtain a few or a dozen attribute points from killing his enemies, it would be like pouring a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. Lin Yuan now had 2 ways to rapidly increase his attribute points. One was to use the system to create a large number of life forms and then start a crazy war with all the surrounding forces. After all, Lin Yuan would also obtain a portion of attribute points from the lives these life forms killed. However, the cost-performance ratio of this method was very low. This was because Lin Yuan first had to obtain the materials from the life forms when creating life forms. After creating life forms, he still had to use his own stored attribute points to increase their strength. To put it bluntly, based on Moros' ability to create demonic beasts, the attribute points these demonic beasts gave Lin Yuan were not even as much as what Lin Yuan invested in them. There was still a long way to go before he could completely enter the mode where he could reap great rewards if he just left them alone. Furthermore, the demonic beasts he created were not immortal. Lin Yuan had already created several demonic beasts that had been upgraded to level 7 of the Wisdom Realm. However, they had all died in battle during the conflict with the Green Swamp clan. No matter how one looked at it, this path was not only a small reward, but also a high risk. It was also easy to lose everything. The other method was the Joss Flame model. This was the Joss Flame power that was produced when countless life forms worshipped Lin Yuan. In fact, it could be converted into various types of energy. Under a certain ratio, Lin Yuan could directly convert the Joss Flame power into attribute points. Although this function had not yet been activated due to the failure of the previous mission, every system model that accumulated to a certain extent would successively activate the subfunctions of the model. For example, the territory model's soldier creation, the war model's war treasury, and war mission. Therefore, when the Joss Flame power accumulated to a certain extent, this conversion function would be activated sooner or later. The endless power of incense meant that even if Lin Yuan were to lie down and not move, he would be able to obtain a large number of attribute point. Moreover, the strands of Lin Yuan's divine sense in the Dragon King Temple could become Lin Yuan's doppelganger under the influence of the power of incense, helping him oversee the Northern Frontiers territory. Even if Lin Yuan's main body died, he could replace one of the strands of divine sense to continue living and use the power of incense to rebuild his body. The Dragon King Temple represented Lin Yuan's infinite life. Unless Lin Yuan was wiped out by the system, or if his opponent destroyed the Dragon King Temple and killed all his followers, Lin Yuan would never completely die. Even if he died, he could be reborn as a Yin Master. However, in that case, Lin Yuan would become a special life form that relied on the power of incense to exist and become stronger. He would be even more miserable than Li Zhong, who cultivated the Son of Heaven gazing at air. This was because the withered territory would only cause the ruler to lose all his cultivation and followers to be wiped out. However, it would cause a Yin Master to die directly. Lin Yuan was very sure that this Joss Flame model was the correct path for him to progress to the next stage of his growth. Moreover, The Joss flame model itself was also an inexhaustible treasure. Of course, becoming a Yin master was not completely without hidden dangers. This was because this was the path that the system had chosen for him. If the investiture of the gods was a battle between the way of the heavens and Hongjun, then escaping from the origin world of the untainted land was undoubtedly the best example. During the investiture of the gods, the insufferably arrogant experts had almost all fallen in the battle of the investiture of the gods. After that, they were listed on the investiture of the gods, which could be considered as a branch of the Yin master. Their survival depended on the power of incense. It was not an exaggeration to call them slaves. After all, if one wanted to kill these gods, one only needed to say that they were superstitious. Slowly reducing their followers, their strength would become weaker and weaker. Even the insufferably arrogant experts of the Antiquity Age would gradually be unable to show their existence. Therefore, Lin Yuan was very sure that before he had enough strength to challenge Hongjun and the Way of the Heavens, he could walk this path. However, he could not walk too deep into it. Otherwise, the situation of those famous experts withering after becoming gods would reappear on him. However, the production of the power of incense was still a difficult problem for the current Lin Yuan. Therefore, he could not leave even if he wanted to. Because he had already become the god of the northern frontier, there were no other gods in this land. The Dragon King temples in various places were also flourishing with incense. However, this was meaningless because the people in the northern frontier did not sincerely believe in him. In the hearts of the people who did not know about the struggle between the upper class, even Li Zhong's prestige was higher than Lin Yuan's. This was because Lin Yuan's existence was good for the entire northern frontier. However, Li Zhong's actions had helped the people at the bottom to obtain benefits that they could see and touch. The people who had set up shrines to Li Zhong at home were more pious than Lin Yuan's. Those who knew about Lin Yuan's actions were either the heads of aristocratic families or the subordinates of Lin Yuan who existed for their own ambitions. They would treat Lin Yuan as an excellent ruler, but they would not treat Lin Yuan as a true god. Without devout believers, it was naturally impossible to produce the power of incense. Lin Yuan thought about this problem in his mind as he hurried on his way. Of course, he could easily make the people in the northern frontier become his devout believers. However, in that case, the meaning of Li Zhong's existence would be lost. Lin Yuan was also not suitable to do these things personally. After all, a monster doing its best for the welfare of the human people. Not to mention whether others would believe this, even Lin Yuan himself felt awkward. System, tell me, how can I obtain the power of incense? Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and asked in a deep voice. The system maintained its silence, obviously unwilling to respond to Lin Yuan. After all, it had already planned out the path to obtain the power of incense for Lin Yuan. It had even offered the big pie of conversion templates. However, Lin Yuan did not do as it wished and even failed the mission. After entering the arcane realm and consuming the dragonization route, he even obtained the nether realm's black water, an innate talent that even the system had to be wary of. It would be strange if it still wanted to respond to Lin Yuan. When humans are faced with despair, they will seek comfort from the spiritual level. If you want the people in the northern frontier to worship and worship you, then your actions are undoubtedly a failure. This is because they are safe, happy, and prosperous under your control. They believe that everything they want can be obtained through their own efforts. The existence of a god does not mean much to them. Under such circumstances, if you expect them to worship you as a god, then you might as well expect the power of incense to appear out of thin air. After a long while, the system finally complained somewhat helplessly. Chapter 538. Lin Yuan rolled his eyes helplessly at the system's ridicule. He didn't think his actions were wrong. After all, he lived in a blissful era without any legends of gods. In the world of his previous life, everything could be obtained through hard work. After coming to this world, Lin Yuan used his own hard work to transform the northern frontier into what he knew. This northern frontier would make Lin Yuan feel close and familiar, and wouldn't make him feel out of place as an outsider with memories of his previous life. But here was the problem. Because this time, he wasn't walking in the world as a human. He was that God. As a God, he was telling the world that even without the blessings of gods, they could obtain everything through their own hard work. Wasn't this dragging himself down? Host, you still have a chance to repent. As long as you give up part of the benefits of the northern frontier and let the northern frontier return to its previous path, you can use facts to tell the world that without your protection, everything they see is just a bubble that can collapse at any time. Under such circumstances, they will quickly give up on the idea of a new life and worship you, the high and mighty God, once again. The system couldn't be bothered to ridicule Lin Yuan's actions. Lin Yuan's origin world had abolished feudal superstitions and rejected all kinds of supernatural beings because that was the method used by the heavenly axiom to deal with the increasingly powerful gods. After all, the heavenly axiom didn't rely on the power of faith to exist. However, as the god it chose, Lin Yuan didn't hesitate to use such methods. He was simply making life difficult for himself. This also caused Lin Yuan's cultivation to progress slowly after he became a mountain lord, and he still hadn't broken through to the second level of the mountain lord realm. This was a classic example of me against myself. It seemed that although Lin Yuan's actions were dragging himself down, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't be saved. This was because although the people of the northern frontier had experienced a change of dynasties, they were still the same people. They still had a sense of reverence for powerful cultivators and ancient gods. As long as Lin Yuan was willing to let them face despair, they would still worship Lin Yuan as their faith, and he would be able to create an endless supply of incense. I'll think about it. Lin Yuan took a deep breath and began to travel at full speed. In ancient times, regardless of whether it was humans or gods, they all had the power to lift things as if they were light. It was a power that was enough to make the heavenly Tao tremble in fear. For example, even King Ju of Shang, the first fatuous ruler of all time, was a terrifying existence known as the King of Men. He was so terrifying that he did not feel any psychological burden when he did something like molesting Nua. Nua could not even do anything to him. She could only use all kinds of tricks to plot against King Ju of Shang and make him lose his kingly aura. That was how Ju replaced Shang. On the other hand, if what happened in the future of Untainted Land was as Lin Yuan had guessed, the position of King Ju should be Lin Yuan's future goal. An existence that could be compared to Hong Jun and the heavenly Tao. That's right, they're on the same level. He did not care about Nua, who was in Hong Juan's camp. At the same time, the entire Great Ju faction was his enemy. This was because King Ju was known as the King of Men, while the Emperor of Ju was known as the Son of Heaven. This title already explained too many problems. The ruler of the Shang dynasty was the King of Men, who represented the human race. He was an existence that could wrestle with the heavenly Tao and Hongjuan's camps. Even in the secular world, the Shang dynasty had absolute power. Even the sages could not do anything to him. Although King Ju was the loser, he was not defeated by any side. It was the other two camps that joined forces to deal with him. This also showed that Hong Jun and the heavenly Tao were afraid of this King of Men. Of course, in the process of the two camps dealing with the King of Men, the one who had the last laugh was still the origin of the heavenly Tao. This was because the victor's king called himself the Son of Heaven, which implied that he was the eldest son or son of heaven. However, the heavenly Tao obtained the ruling power of the secular world, while Hongjuan's side came up with the list of deification, officially putting the special existence of God on the stage. They told the world that everything was bestowed by God. Even if the Son of Heaven was unvirtuous, it would make the gods angry and cause all kinds of natural and man-made disasters. They tried to place God above man, and then started the second battle between the two sides. In order to erase the influence of the gods on the secular world, the heavenly Tao of the source world could be said to have painstakingly gone through the changes of countless dynasties. Finally, the so-called Son of Heaven's right was banned, and the high and mighty emperor was beaten into a mortal. All kinds of beliefs and sacrifices were cancelled. It was not easy to make God become a legend and gradually fade away. However, in this battle, the winner might not necessarily be the heavenly Tao. This was because although it banned the concept of God, man, who had been unable to recover from the setback after King Ju, rose again. He used the power of science and technology to fight against the heavenly Tao. Even the title of Son of Heaven was abolished. After a short conversation, Lin Yuan quickly straightened out his thoughts. Firstly, the heavenly Tao and Hongjun were not existences that he could not contend with. This was because the former King Ju and the previous King of Men in his previous life had become victors through a long period of time and hard work. They had become existences that the heavenly Tao and Hongjun feared. Secondly, Lin Yuan had also determined his future path, King Ju. He was not a mortal with a physical body. He, who had the ability to cultivate, did not need to completely rely on the power of science and technology. He could completely become an existence like King Ju and directly participate in the struggle between Hongjun and the heavenly Tao. He did not need to use the power of science and technology to deter the other two camps and simply make them not dare to use him as a chess piece. Lin Yuan did not like to be schemed against, and he did not like to have his life and death in the hands of others. Therefore, his goal was not to protect himself, but to win. He wanted to let these existences, who had been high and mighty since the prehistoric times, know the will and power of man. Even though he had lost the appearance and habits of a human, the essence of Lin Yuan's soul had not changed for a moment. Even when he came to this world, the thoughts that constantly spurred him to become stronger and return to his original world to take revenge had not faded for a moment. It was just that before that, he had a new goal. Whatever. However, I have to remind the host that no matter how powerful a life form is, there is a limit to its lifespan. Although you are very young, it is still very difficult for you to enter the next realm without relying on the power of incense. And even if you can do it, how will you cross the next realm? You are the host chosen by this system. In the future, you will also evolve into a life form that will make all the world submit to you. Although this system will not force you to do anything, it will re-examine your potential at any time. If you lose the space to improve, this system will unbind you at any time and choose a new host. Chapter 539. Listening to the system's cold, electronically synthesized voice, Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. This was the reason why he had always wanted to transcend the system and obtain the power that truly belonged to him. Everything he had now was given to him by the system. If the two sides really turned against each other one day, then the system would unbind him and he would be nothing. He would be thankful if he could return to being a little black snake and live out the rest of his life. In addition, Lin Yuan also planned to deepen his cooperation with the Incubus. From the words of the Incubus, although they were similar to the rebel army in Hongjuan's eyes, they did not have a close relationship with the heavenly Tao. Moreover, from a historical perspective, the strength of this rebel army could be said to be quite terrifying. After the fall of the Zhou dynasty, the great Qin Empire swept through the 6 states and became the first emperor, but he was not called the Son of Heaven. Later, there were legends that said that Ying Zheng was the ancestor dragon. Therefore, the rebel army of the Incubus had also won in this multi-sided competition. Although the great Qin Empire had fallen for 2 generations, the amount of information was too much for Lin Yuan at this moment. This meant that the rebel army of the Incubus once had the power to fight against the heavenly Tao and Hongjun. Although they failed in the end, the fighting experience passed down by the victors was still worth learning. 4 hours later, a fleet of turrets set off northward from the lower reaches of the Wei River under the jurisdiction of the Shunwu dynasty. A young man in white put his hands behind his back. Scarlet light flickered in his clear black and white eyes. This fleet of turrets did not have any flags, but the scale of more than 300 turrets was not something that could be casually gathered by just anyone. With the scale of the turrets of the Shunwu dynasty, each turrets could carry 3,000 soldiers. If this fleet was full, this team could instantly bring out a lineup of nearly 900,000 soldiers to fight a battle. Even the 5,000 soldiers of the Fallen Star Army, who were patrolling the area at the moment, would not have been able to do anything to them. What was even more terrifying was that the ones patrolling the perimeter of the ship were also dressed in white, with swords hanging from their waists. Even the weakest among them was at level 6 of the airborne realm. If that was all there was to it, the cultivators trained by the northern region would have been on par with them. However, The oldest among the group of people dressed in white looked to be in his late 20s, and there was no lack of teenagers in their teens. Even those top-notch sects and clans might not have been able to gather such a team of such a level of cultivation and scale. The merchant ships coming and going on the Wei River were all shocked for a while when they saw this huge fleet of turrets passed by their own fleet. "We won't run into any trouble, will we, first generation?" Behind the young man in white was a girl in white with eyebrows and eyes. She looked to be around 13 or 14 years old, and even her facial features were not fully developed yet. However, the aura on her body was extremely terrifying. The aura of a heavenly strength realm overflowed, and even the merchant ships passing by did not dare to look at this luxurious turrets at the center of the fleet. The young man looked at the raging waters of the Wei River, and a wicked smile appeared on his handsome face. He said in a cold voice, "No matter how powerful the Black Jiao is, it is nothing but a beast. Those rumors about how powerful it is are just a bunch of trash who dare not face their own failure and are just trying to brag about it. Not to mention that it can't detect that we are going through the Wei River. Even if it did, do you think I would be afraid of it?" At this point, the young man slowly clenched his fists, and his expression became somewhat ferocious. "We are the powerful divine ones. How can these weak humans and demonic beasts stop us?" The girl in white curled her lips, but she did not dare to refute. This was because the young man in white in front of her was the first generation, the pure-blooded sky demon with the noblest bloodline. Not to mention those existences on the surrounding turrets who had taken the elixir of immortality and turned into sky demons. Even an ordinary sky demon like her would not be able to show any disrespect or hostility to him under the suppression of this bloodline. After all, there was almost no meaning in making peace with a sky demon without a physical body. The first-generation sky demon that was born under such circumstances would directly crush all the other sky demons in terms of bloodline. Even their parents would only have the qualifications to bow down in front of them. However, whether or not this exceptional talent feared the Black Flood Dragon was something that different people had different opinions about. If the Black Jiao was really not worth mentioning, as he said, this first generation would not have released the news that the Jade Lake Heavenly Palace was going to visit the Khan of the Shuangjian dynasty in advance. Furthermore, he had prepared a sky demon army that was not weak and had followed the original plan to travel by land to the Shuangjian dynasty, while he led all the remaining forces of the Jade Lake Heavenly Palace north from the Wei River to the Frost Plains. If this was not fear, what else could it be? At this moment, a figure in white suddenly flew out of the ship at the forefront. A moment later, a sky demon at Airborne Realm Level 9 knelt in front of the first generation with one knee and said in a deep voice, "First generation, there is an army of the northern frontier ahead of us that has set up a blockade. They want us to provide proof of our identity, otherwise we will not be allowed to pass." The first generation's expression turned slightly gloomy, and he coldly said, "How many times do I have to tell you? Do not call me first generation when we are out there. You have to call me Palace Lord or Young Master Jiao. Yes, Palace Lord. Please punish us for our ignorance, Palace Lord." The sky demon gasped and directly pressed his head to the floor, his body trembling slightly. The Palace Lord waved his hand in annoyance and coldly said, "Forget it. There is no need to argue with a sky demon like you. Do you know which army of the northern frontier is setting up a blockade? There was no navy in the northern frontier, or rather, there was no human navy. The ones hibernating in the Wei River were all aquatic monsters loyal to Lin Yuan. These monsters lurking in the water could easily cut through the depths of ships, making it impossible for humans to stand in the Wei River. They also took advantage of the environment to fight humans, making it easy for them to drag humans who were stronger than them into the river and devour them. Therefore, compared to the wide waters of the Wei River, the Shunwu dynasty was more inclined to fight at the source of the Wei River, where the water flow was slow and the water was narrow. Now that a fleet of ships suddenly appeared out of nowhere and claimed to be the army of the northern frontier, it was easy to be stunned. I have asked, and they said that they are the Blackwater Army, but before this, I have never heard of the Blackwater Army. However, they have the military identification of the northern frontier on them, so they should be the newly established army of the northern frontier. The Sky Demon tried his best to calm down his trembling voice, but it was difficult to do so in front of the temperamental palace lord. Previously, there was a sky demon from a different race who bumped into the palace lord and had his throat pierced by the palace lord. Even his soul was pulled out and eaten by the palace lord. Chapter 540. Blackwater Army? I've never heard of them before. The palace master waved his hand indifferently and said in a cold voice, "Inform all the ships to prepare for battle. We're going to rush over." As a noble divine race, the palace master had never put the weak human beings in his eyes. After all, human beings were nothing more than flesh and blood for them and could be replaced at any time. If the Southern Expedition or the Fallen Star Army were to stop them, he would be patient enough to take out the identity documents prepared by Lei Chouxing and give them to the other party, so as to avoid unnecessary trouble. But how dare a mere army that he had never heard of stop his fleet? Sky Demon lowered his head and responded. His figure once again rushed out, not daring to stay here for a moment longer. On the other side, seeing the change in the formation of the ships, Qin Yu narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a cold voice, "Shameless things. Such a large fleet is not allowed to enter the Wei River. I just let them prove their identity and haven't driven them back yet. Since you want to rush over." As an outstanding figure in the star class of the northern frontier, although Qin Yu was a general in the archer ranks, water battles were also the battlefield of archers, so he had also participated in the relevant training. Naturally, he could easily see that the formation of the other side's ships had changed into a battle formation. In fact, the Blackwater Army didn't care about the Wei River basin at all. This was the territory of the aquatic demon beasts. It was just that the other side was unlucky and happened to encounter the Blackwater Army that had retreated to the northern frontier. Therefore, they blocked the river and set up defenses to let the other side prove their identity. Beat the drum and summon the demon beasts of the Wei River. Messenger, release the signal flare and summon the surrounding troops. Zhao Guangchong stretched his shoulders, picked up his sky pisser, and walked towards the warships waiting beside the big ship. Soon, more than 30 battleships set off and quickly approached the tower ship that was changing its formation. Zhao Guangchong carried the sky pisser on his shoulder, coldly looked at the huge ship that was blocking his way, and said coldly, "Everyone on the ship, listen to me. Wei River is now under the jurisdiction of the northern frontier. You have not proven your identity, and you have violated the rule that no ships with more than 10,000 people are allowed to enter Wei River. Now, I will give you two choices. One is to turn back to the port you sailed from, and the other is..." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Without waiting for Zhao Guangchong to finish his words, the men in white on the ship took out their bows and launched an attack. "You're courting death." Zhao Guangchong roared and waved the sky pisser in his hand, sweeping away the arrows that were flying towards him. With the Blackwater Army's equipment, these crossbows weren't enough to hurt them at all. However, the opponent's disregard for them was tantamount to giving them a resounding slap in the face. What kind of existence was the Blackwater Army? It was one of the best troops in the northern frontier. Even if it wasn't well known, its degree of terror was directly equal to the 5,000-old soldiers of the Fallen Star Army. After all, those who could join the Blackwater Army were all members of the star class of the northern frontier. As long as they were given enough time to grow, they would be able to lead an army by themselves in the future. Their status was much higher than the so-called Shenlin Jun reserves. This round of shooting by the Jade Lake Immortal Palace was tantamount to offending 80% of the generals who would carry the northern frontier in the future. But the Jade Lake Immortal Palace didn't care, because they were the high and mighty, immortal Sky Demon. They didn't care about the weak human race at all. Without needing Zhao Guangchong's order, more than 30 warships quickly approached the ship. Soldiers wearing black scale armor stepped on the warships and jumped to the edge of the ship, waving the weapons in their hands and starting a hand-to-hand combat. There were more than 10,000 people on the warships that were attacked, but they were completely defeated by the Blackwater Army, which was less than 300 people. Not only did they fail to recapture the edge of the ship, but they were also attacked deeper and deeper by the enemy. In a naval battle, the advantage in numbers was actually meaningless, because if one's cultivation didn't reach a certain level, It was impossible to walk on water as if it was flat ground. Coupled with the height of the ship itself, unless one could fly, the ones fighting with the Blackwater Army would always be a small group of Jade Lake Immortal Palace members at the front. As the warships relied on their fast speed to transport more and more Blackwater Army to the warships, the first few warships instantly went out of control. The nearby warships that weren't attacked began to quickly approach in an attempt to provide support, but before they could sail far, the demon beasts lurking under the water had already successfully penetrated their transmission line. The gradually sinking ship suddenly frightened many people. But these people in white all had good cultivation, so they quickly jumped to the nearest warship. Only a few members of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace who were too weak carelessly fell into the Wei River. Then, without even a moment of struggle, they were dragged down by the aquatic demon beasts. In just the blink of an eye, the water around the sunken ship was dyed red, and even the surging Wei River couldn't wash away the blood in an instant. Counterattack! The palace master roared with a gloomy face, his hands on the railing of the warship. His warship had been specially modified, so it was impossible for those demon beasts to penetrate the bottom of the ship. But this was only one ship, and the rest of the warships would sink sooner or later. Hundreds of thousands of people couldn't be squeezed on one ship. In that case, even if the demon beasts didn't attack, the ship would sink because it couldn't bear the weight. When they lost their footing, they would all die here. With the palace master's order, the sky demon on the other warships didn't care that their allies were still fighting. They took out their bows and began to shoot at the warships that were gradually occupied by the Blackwater Army. But their arrows didn't cause much damage to the Blackwater Army, and instead killed many of their own people. Qin Yu, who was in charge at the rear, raised the corner of his mouth and sneered, showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. Blackwater Archer Battalion, listen to my order. Aim at those people in white who aren't fighting in close combat with our fellow soldiers. Fire at full power and kill them. The words fire at full power didn't mean much to ordinary archers, but to the Blackwater Archer Battalion, this order had another meaning: burning money. Yes, burning money. When fighting at a distance above the Wei River, it was almost impossible to recover the sharp arrows made of the crimson steel mastiff bones. Except for those arrows that were embedded in bodies, almost all of them would be washed away by the surging Wei River. It was also impossible for the arrows to be embedded in bodies. Such arrows could only be pierced through several people in a row and then got stuck in abnormally hard bones. Otherwise, with the physical fitness of airborne realm cultivators, there was no way they could withstand such arrows. The economic losses caused by a round of volleys were enough to bankrupt a medium-sized family in an instant. This was one of the ways the Blackwater Army fought, throwing money at the enemy. Chapter 541. The wooden planks of the ships, the bodies of the members of the Jade Lake Divine Palace, under the barrage of the Blackwater archers, they were as fragile as thin pieces of paper. In just 2 breaths of time, more than a dozen ships at the front of the team were shot full of holes, and the people in white on the ships were directly wiped out. Be it in terms of destructive power or efficiency, they were much more terrifying than the melee Blackwater Army that had been slaughtering at the beginning. Crack! The uncontrollable power caused the palace lord to crush the fence in front of her, and the scarlet color in her eyes became even more intense. All of the sky demon carriers she brought out were late airborne realm and even heavenly dipper realm. Although they were all cultivators, such power was enough to make any regular army tremble in fear, unless they were fighting existences at the level of Shen Lin Jun and Xueliao Knight. However, the Blackwater Army she heard before was suspected to be a new name set up in the northern frontier, a small army that was not well known. Could this be called a ragtag army that was not well known? First generation, do you want us to go up there? The girl in white frowned, and her face was also somewhat gloomy. As an ordinary sky demon, she was one of the earliest beings to come to this world, and her physical strength had been nourished to the heavenly dipper realm. There were more than 10,000 people at her level in this team. The combat strength of 10,000 heavenly dipper realm sky demon was not something that those inferior airborne realm sky demons could compare with. The palace master shook his head gently and said hatefully, "Order the rear army to retreat. It's just a miscellaneous army. It's not worthy of our noble Tian clan to fight in person. Let's wait until they have the name of the falling star army. Yes. The girl in white cupped her hands and responded in a deep voice. Although she did not think so in her heart. Because in her view, this noble first generation had been frightened by the Black Jiao's reputation of winning every battle, and had lost the will to fight in a situation where the situation was unfavorable. Not worthy of the noble heavenly ones to fight, it was nothing more than an excuse. In the end, she was afraid and felt that she could not win this battle. Commander Qin, something is not right. A Blackwater archer trotted to Qin Yu's side and frowned. The ships that have not come into contact with us have begun to retreat, but those people in white who were abandoned are not affected at all. Instead, they are attacking Commander Zhao's team even more frantically, as if they don't seem to be afraid of death, right? The corners of Qin Yu's mouth curled up slightly as she interrupted the Blackwater archer. Then, she waved her hand and said in a cold voice, "These guys should be members of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace and not humans." According to Lord Dragon King's description, the death of their physical bodies does not mean that they will truly die. Their main bodies are spirits. Therefore, killing their physical bodies will only allow their spirits to break free from their shackles. Once they find a suitable physical body, they will be able to revive. The Blackwater archer was shocked. As members of the Northern Frontier Star Generals class, they indeed knew many secrets, but compared to Qin Yu and Zhao Guangchong, the information they knew was too little. It was just like how they knew about the Jade Lake Immortal Palace and the Elixir of Immortality. They also knew that the Elixir of Immortality was a trap, but they did not know what the Sky Demon was. Just a group of filthy parasites. Qin Yu pursed his lips and said in a deep voice, "Send those white porcelain bottles to Commander Zhao's side. I want to see if these dregs who rely on other races for the sake of immortality really don't know death." The white porcelain bottles were the demon-suppressing artifacts that Lin Yuan and the Southern Frontier's top forces had agreed to use. Although they were made of ordinary materials, they had engraved a Sky Demon sealing array inside the bottles when they were made. Once the bottles were opened, they would absorb the Sky Demon's body that had been separated from its physical body, and then use the power of the array to shackle the Sky Demon. Of course, the demon-suppressing artifacts were not a long-term solution. They could only seal the Sky Demon for 3 days. If the Sky Demon could not be transported to a forbidden area with a higher-level sealing array within 3 days, the Sky Demon would break out of the seal and quickly escape. Moreover, the stronger the Sky Demon, the faster it would break out of the seal. This demon sealing bottle could only restrain one Sky Demon at a time, and its effective range was only a pitiful 2 meters. It was the lowest level of demon-suppressing artifacts, but it was the most that the top forces could spare to support Lin Yuan. It was originally a demon-suppressing artifact that was supposed to be sent to the northern frontier and distributed to the various armies on the northern frontier. Unexpectedly, they had already started using it before they had even entered the northern frontier. For the northern frontier, this was not good news. Because this meant that the Sky Demon's tentacles had already begun to infiltrate the northern frontier. Moreover, the northern frontier did not have any place to suppress demons. It was said that the whereabouts of Lin Yuan, who could kill the Sky Demon, was currently unknown. At the very least, with Qin Yu's authority, he did not have the qualifications to know the whereabouts of Lin Yuan's original body. Sure enough, with the demon sealing bottle thrown in, those fearless people in white began to hesitate and retreat. It was as if they would rather be shot to death by those sharp arrows than engage in close combat with the Blackwater army. One by one, the demon sealing bottle was sent back from the front line to the rear. The bottle's body was constantly trembling, and the red light that represented the sealing array was also flourishing. Such a strange scene caused many of the Blackwater army soldiers responsible for transporting the demon sealing bottle to tremble in fear. They did not even know what they were fighting with. Because there were no demons and monsters in the Tianwu continent, even if they were transformed into yin spirits, they still had a physical body. The appearance of these invisible things challenged the understanding of all the Blackwater army soldiers. On the side of the Blackwater army, on the side of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace, each and every one of them looked as if they had died. Especially as the first-generation palace master, she almost broke her silver teeth from gritting them. The northern frontier was a new force, and they had not fought with the creatures on the other side of the Tianwu continent. At this moment, they had guessed their identity, and even took out the demon sealing bottle, which was an extremely terrifying weapon against the sky demon. All these signs pointed to one thing, that Trash Lei Chousheng did not hide their whereabouts at all. Those top forces of the Tianwu continent had long known of their existence. Compared to the mysterious Black Jiao, the palace master was obviously more afraid of those top forces. Therefore, even if she was afraid, she still gritted her teeth and ordered, "The appearance of the demon-suppressing weapon means that our existence is no longer a secret. If we do not quickly break the deadlock, we will be wiped out sooner or later. It is time for you to be loyal to the divine race. Listen to my orders, all of you go forward and kill this damned army. Destroy all the demon-suppressing weapons." A group of ordinary sky demon soldiers who had long been eager to give it a try received the first generation's order. They all cheered and stepped into the air, heading straight for Zhao Guangchong and the others who were killing everywhere. There were also some who rushed towards the position of the Blackwater archers. Chapter 542. Despite the extravagant equipment the Blackwater army had, the gap between their cultivation and combat prowess was still not to be ignored. Tens of thousands of Heaven's Strength Realm Sky Demon were thrown into the battlefield, suppressing Zhao Guangchong and the others in an instant. Even the arrows were blocked by the invisible Kai of Vigor, either deviating from their targets or falling into the Wei River. The situation of the entire battlefield was completely reversed in an instant. While fighting was not what cultivators were good at, no one could deny that when an individual's strength reached a certain level, factors such as equipment and battle formations would no longer pose a huge threat. After all, both of those factors were derivatives that could allow one side to easily defeat the other side when both sides were of equal strength. However, an airborne realm cultivator, even if equipped with excellent equipment, was no more than a child with a gun. In the eyes of a real adult, they would still be unable to withstand a single blow. Qin Yu clenched his fists slightly and stared at the battlefield before him, gradually feeling the pressure. PFFTT. 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 At that moment, the nearby water suddenly exploded. Black tentacles reached out from the bottom of the water with a sharp sound, entangling the sky demon who were flying toward the Blackwater Archer battalion. Monsters! The palace lord frowned slightly. Even if Heaven's Strength Realm cultivators were so strong that they could release their Kai of Vigor to avoid water, they would not be able to last long in the face of a great river like the Wei River, which flowed endlessly. As such, the existence of aquatic monsters was still a headache for them. It was also the reason why humans had never been interested in the islands or even the vast seas. The advantage aquatic monsters had in this aspect was enough to drag any opponent to death. Even if one's cultivation level was higher and stronger, one might not be able to catch the aquatic monsters in the water. However, if one did not go ashore, the monsters would have plenty of ways to kill them. However, the worry between the palace lord's brows disappeared in a flash. Aquatic demonic beasts were indeed not easy to deal with, but to the sky demon, his physical body was just something that could be abandoned at any time. Even if the Heaven Realm Sky Demon could not break free from the black tentacles, his life would not be in danger. At most, he would just go back and change his physical body and recuperate for a while. However, the black tentacles were obviously not that simple. After wrapping around the Sky Demon, they actually bit into his flesh bit by bit. But from the outside, there was no trace of them. At most, there was a circle of faint black marks where the tentacles had been wrapped, as if the black tentacles had directly melted away. However, it wasn't as simple as just disappearing. The palace master watched as the sky demon that had been entangled by the sky demon clutched their heads in pain and quickly fell toward the Wei River. Poison! The palace lord cried out in alarm. A look of fear flashed across his eyes, which were flickering with scarlet light. To the sky demon, his physical body was indeed something that could be abandoned at any time. However, he had always kept a respectful distance from those mysterious poisons. After all, according to scientific theory, The sky demon was a kind of spiritual body. Among the poisons, there were many that could cause damage to the mind and even erase the consciousness of the poisoned person, directly turning him into a walking corpse. However, although the sky demon was afraid of poisons, it was extremely difficult to eliminate the sky demon through them. Either the poison was too strong and would immediately take effect the moment it entered the body, or it would have a very long incubation period and would only explode when the sky demon let down his guard. Otherwise, the sky demon could abandon his physical body at any time and throw away the poisoned body like trash. However, the palace master had never seen such a situation before. Because those heavenly demons looked like they were in great pain, it was obvious that this poison could harm them, but it was not the kind of strong poison that could kill them instantly. But until now, none of the heavenly demons had given up their physical bodies and used their spiritual bodies to get rid of the poison. Dozens of Heaven Dipper realm white-clothed people fell into the Wei River, only causing a large splash. Then, there was no sound. Not even a single sky demon's spiritual body came out. Somehow, the palace master felt a trace of uneasiness. As time passed, this uneasiness grew stronger. Jade Lake Palace Master, we are honored by your presence. Why didn't you greet this king? Lin Yuan's huge body slowly broke through the surface of the Wei River. His sharp heterochromatic eyes penetrated the cover of dozens of ships and landed directly on the palace master's face. The murderous intent in his eyes was so cold that the palace master couldn't help but shiver from thousands of meters away. However, the palace master didn't lose to Lin Yuan. The palace master returned the cold gaze to Lin Yuan and said coldly, "Do I need the Northern Frontier's approval to go wherever I go? What's the difference between greeting and not greeting? Does the Dragon King intend to start an all-out war with my Jade Lake Palace?" Ha! Lin Yuan laughed strangely and said in a mocking tone, "Jade Lake Palace? What a big tone. Could it be that in Hongjuan's eyes, lackeys like you who have abandoned your physical body and ego are considered immortals?" As his voice fell, Lin Yuan's eyes revealed a trace of astonishment. Because he had indeed said the two words Hongjun, but when the words came out of his mouth, the two words had become mute. It was as if an invisible force had forcefully corrected the words that Lin Yuan had blurted out. However, it was unknown whether it was a trick of Incubus or the system residing in Lin Yuan's body. Only after this sentence was changed did Lin Yuan realize that he had forgotten himself due to his anger. The system still hadn't revealed its identity. The origin of Heavenly Tao was just a guess that Lin Yuan had made after obtaining some information from Incubus. The battle between Hongjun and the Heavenly Tao wasn't something that he could come into contact with. Therefore, revealing the master behind the sky demon wouldn't do Lin Yuan any good. Instead, it would make the system, suspected of being the Heavenly Tao, wary and murderous of him. As for the other side, there was no need to talk about it. An existence that could steal the Heavenly Tao couldn't possibly have weak magical powers. Even the twisted and dirty evil gods in the myths of Krusu in his previous life couldn't be directly called by their names. How could Hongjun, as the most powerful person in the untainted land, not have the corresponding means? Now that Lin Yuan didn't have any means to conceal himself, if he directly said the name Hongjun, the other party would probably be able to travel through endless time and space in an instant and wipe out this future danger in the cradle. Even the system might not be able to escape. Everyone cultivates for immortality, but immortality is just empty talk if they don't become immortals. I have granted them immortality. Don't they deserve to be called immortals? The palace master put his hands behind his back and sized up Lin Yuan with cold eyes. Chapter 543. You think you're worthy? Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes and sneered. Who do you think you are? You don't even have the slightest idea, so I'll help you. As soon as he said this, the surface of the Wei River began to churn, and a black body of water that the water could not bring away appeared. Immediately after, distorted and ugly humanoid creatures struggled to crawl out of the black water. From their pale faces, one could vaguely see that they were originally human, but their pale skin was abnormally wrinkled like dried tree bark. Their eyes also did not have pupils and the whites of their eyes. Instead, there was a scarlet-red light. Black liquid continuously flowed out of their slightly open mouths. Their mouths were filled with sharp, crisscrossing fangs. They looked 70% like beasts and 30% like humans. There were also some figures wrapped in black armor. They looked more like humans, but their hair and eyebrows were reddish-brown, and their eye sockets were filled with purple light. The former were inferior sky demons that had taken the elixir of immortality, while the latter were ordinary sky demons that had come from the other side of the heavenly gate. The palace master's eyes widened, and he looked at Lin Yuan and the sky demon that had revealed their true forms in disbelief. As a first generation with a noble bloodline, he naturally knew what the sky demon's true forms were like. That was why he felt shock and fear when these monsters appeared. The sky demon was a spiritual body, and they could only reveal their true forms under extremely special circumstances. During these times, the sky demon would often crazily make peace, trying to give birth to a powerful first-generation sky demon. However, on the Tianwu continent, this was the first time the sky demon had appeared in their true forms. Moreover, the palace master did not see any desire in the eyes of the sky demon. However, they could not be described as clear-headed, because their eyes were filled with madness, or perhaps it could be said that they wanted to destroy everything. Do you want to kill? Go. Drag your fellow clansmen down and let them go where they belong. Lin Yuan looked at the ferocious monsters standing on the water surface, and a rare trace of gentleness appeared in his eyes. This was the first time he had used the Netherrealm Blackwater, but he could clearly feel that the sky demon that had been pulled into the Netherrealm Blackwater was like an extension of his body. As long as he had a thought, these ugly and ferocious monsters would do whatever he wanted. However, Lin Yuan did not receive any attribute points. He did not know if this talent conflicted with the system, or if these sky demon were only controlled by the Netherrealm's Blackwater and not dead. However, it didn't matter. Lin Yuan sized up the palace master with a mocking gaze. In just a few breaths of time, the palace master's face regained its composure. She said coldly, "Dragon King, I don't understand what you mean. Do you think you can slander the immortals of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace by releasing a few monsters?" With that, the palace master waved his sleeves, and his tone became even colder. "Who will go get rid of these monsters for me?" As soon as he finished speaking, more than 10 Heaven Star Realm Sky Demons shot out. Although they did not know what method Lin Yuan had used, under the orders of the first king, there was no possibility of them refusing. In just one exchange, apart from the Heaven Star Realm Sky Demon that could barely hold on, the inferior Sky Demon were almost instantly killed. However, a moment later, the pool of black water beside Lin Yuan wriggled again. Soon, the slaughtered inferior Sky Demon actually appeared in front of everyone again. This was the tyranny of the Netherrealm's black water. Once they entered the Netherrealm's black water, only Lin Yuan could control their life and death. Unless Lin Yuan wanted their souls to scatter, they would still be reborn in the Netherrealm's black water even if they were killed countless times and then reincarnated again. Therefore, Lin Yuan could give any orders to the things controlled by the Netherrealm's black water. These existences had no other desires but to be completely freed. And the only one who could give them that freedom was the master of the Netherrealm's black water, Lin Yuan. Slaughter, rebirth, slaughter again, and rebirth again. The experts of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace tore apart these sky demon bodies again and again. However, a moment later, these controlled sky demon bodies would be reborn in the Netherrealm's black water. Perhaps it was because they had died too many times, but these heavenly demons started to show signs of insanity or numbness. They were no longer like when they had just been reborn. They would subconsciously avoid the enemy's attacks and show expressions of fear. In their eyes, there was nothing in the world that was worthy of their fear except for Lin Yuan. Therefore, when faced with the attacks of the experts of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace, not only did they not make any movements to dodge, but they also madly affected the opponent's attacks and then clawed, bit, and madly counterattacked. During this time, there were 2 experts of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace who had the idea of capturing the ringleader to capture the bandits. They directly bypassed the controlled sky demon bodies to attack Lin Yuan. However, Lin Yuan did not even make a move. They were pulled by the sky demon that had been resurrected from the Netherrealm's black water and forcefully dragged into the bottomless black water. Then, there were 2 more sky demon bodies that had been resurrected. Such a strange situation kept happening. Even the palace master's face gradually lost its composure. He glanced gloomily at Lin Yuan. He did not care about saying any harsh words. He just waved his sleeve, and the ship showed signs of retreating. No one was willing to fight a battle that they did not have any hope of winning. The dozen or so Heaven's Strength Realm Heavenly Gates experts were almost exhausted from fighting, but Lin Yuan still looked calm and composed as if he did not use any strength at all. In reality, this was indeed the case. After all, the Netherrealm's black water was taken from a corner of the Netherworld River. It originally flowed endlessly. The lonely souls and wild ghosts in the Netherworld River were also constantly suffering. Lin Yuan did not need to use demonic power to activate it. He only needed to activate his innate skill and then watch the show. Of course, there was no invincible innate skill in the world. After this period of observation, Lin Yuan had already discovered that the Netherrealm's black water controlled things. If one stood on the Netherrealm's black water, they would be able to explode with the strongest combat power. The further away they were from the Netherrealm's black water, the weaker their combat power would be. If they were more than 500 meters away, they would even collapse on their own and be reborn in the Netherrealm's black water. Once the Netherrealm's black water was activated, it would not move again unless Lin Yuan deactivated his innate skill and then activated it again after half an hour of long guidance. Otherwise, once the enemy left the attack range of the Netherrealm's black water, Lin Yuan could only watch helplessly. Chapter 544. Lin Yuan understood that the son of a wealthy family should not sit in a dangerous situation. Although he was confident in his own combat strength, there were more than 3,000 sky demon cultivators in the Heaven Dipper realm around the palace master. Without the Netherrealm's black water to fight against the sky demon, Lin Yuan felt that he would be sending himself to death if he rushed forward. Therefore, Lin Yuan could only stare at the palace master and the others who were trying to escape. But soon, 2 slender figures descended from the sky, one on the left and one on the right, blocking the escape route of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace's ship. On the left was a handsome young man with pale skin and a red robe wrapped around his body. His temperament was slightly gloomy. On the right was Kang Lezen, who had long black and white hair and was dressed neither fish nor fowl. The 2 Kongming realm cultivators crossed their arms in front of their chests and coldly glanced at the Jade Lake Immortal Palace's huge ship. The red-clothed youth on the left was still holding a head that was dripping with blood. He casually threw it, and the head whizzed through the air and heavily smashed into a ship that was trying to retreat. Boom! There was a loud noise. The ship, which was dozens of meters high, was smashed into pieces by a small head. Kang Lezen tilted his head and stared at the ship in the middle of the fleet with ridicule. He said coldly, "You Sky Demon clan really don't put us in your eyes. You openly built the Jade Lake Immortal Palace in the south of the Shunwu Imperial Kingdom and gave us the elixir of immortality for free. Now you want to get out of this situation of being a turtle in a jar and drag the Shuangjin dynasty down with you." Speaking of this, Kang Lezen narrowed his eyes slightly and his killing intent soared. He roared, "Do you think we are dead?" In front of him was the unfathomable Lin Yuan, and behind him were 2 members of the top forces. Judging from the situation on the field at this moment, the palace master seemed to have nowhere to retreat. He had no other choice but to fight to the death. However, there was no trace of panic on the palace lord's face. He merely raised his hands calmly and muttered something. Strangely, he did not make a single sound. In an instant, the clear sky above the Wei River darkened. Countless black clouds appeared, and under the layers, the sky darkened. However, those black clouds exuded an ominous aura. They were not the kind of dark clouds that indicated rain, but more like a word Lin Yuan had read in a novel in his previous life, demonic aura. All of a sudden, Lin Yuan seemed to see a scarlet eye slowly open high up in the sky, staring at him mercilessly. Suddenly, countless thoughts appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. Most of them were that he had become a demonic beast and could never become a human again. The grievances of his previous life were the matters of his previous life, and he would never have the chance to take revenge. Also, he was essentially an outsider. No matter what he did or how long he stayed in the Tianwu continent, he was incompatible with this world. These negative thoughts kept breeding in Lin Yuan's mind, disillusioned and breeding again. It was as if Lin Yuan had to deny all his efforts and bow to the tragic fate in the future. Indistinctly, Lin Yuan even had the thought of dying. Ding. Negative spirit invasion detected. Host, please calm down and visualize the star chart to resist the opponent's negative spirit. The system's voice suddenly sounded in Lin Yuan's mind. Like a sudden clap of thunder, Lin Yuan was instantly liberated from his negative emotions. Ever since Lin Yuan did not follow the path it had planned and successfully activated the incense power model, the system had been silent for a long time. Although all the functional membranes could still be used, it had not given Lin Yuan any new skills or system models for a long time. In fact, it had been in a standby state for a long time. Unless Lin Yuan took the initiative to call the system, and it had to be a topic related to the activation of the incense power model, otherwise, the system would be unbound to Lin Yuan and watch him fend for himself. But now, it seemed that the system's thoughts were different from what Lin Yuan had expected. Because when Lin Yuan's heart was in despair, the system once again displayed its power and awakened Lin Yuan's mind that was gradually being controlled. It also told Lin Yuan how to resist the opponent. Lin Yuan was slightly stunned, but he quickly began to visualize the star chart that he had obtained from the war treasury. His heterochromatic eyes kept flickering with a strange luster as if countless stars were flickering in his eyes. At the same time, Lin Yuan also felt a strong and violent force rushing into his body and directly confronting the negative spirit. Then, he began to fight head-on. The two spiritual forces in Lin Yuan's mind were like two unbeatable armies fighting. Even though Lin Yuan's spiritual body did not participate in this battle, his mind, which was the battlefield, was aching faintly. He even felt a splitting headache, as if his head was going to explode in the next second. The strong and violent force was the power of the stars. After all, Lin Yuan was a highly educated person, so he knew very well what the nature of the stars, which were believed to be inhabited by immortals, was. They were not as gentle and beautiful as they were on Earth. In the universe, there were stars expanding, exploding, and even deviating from their trajectories to collide with other stars and be destroyed. These seemingly beautiful things were essentially bombs that could explode at any time. What frightened Lin Yuan the most was the negative spirit that had controlled him. Although the power of the stars was not the real power of the stars, the star chart produced by the system was not bad. However, the opponent was able to resist the power of the stars in the star chart with only one spiritual force. This kind of terrifying power was extremely terrifying. What kind of existence could resist the power of the stars with its own strength? And it was clear that Lin Yuan was not the only one who was affected by the negative spirit. The Blackwater Army warriors, Kang Lezon, and the blood-red clothed young man, who were closer to him, all had painful expressions on their faces. However, the Sky Demon did not take the opportunity to attack. Instead, they knelt on the ground devoutly as if they were worshipping a god, worshipping the 9 heavens that were shrouded in layers of dark clouds. At this moment, Lin Yuan suddenly heard the sound of Buddhist chanting. Balls of golden light kept falling from the sky. The Sky Demon that came into contact with the golden light quickly smiled like snow under the scorching sun. The Blackwater Army warriors that were shrouded in the golden light quickly regained their composure. Their bodies swayed, then they fell into a deep sleep. Lin Yuan, on the other hand, could clearly feel that the third spiritual force had begun to pour into his sea of consciousness. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,